Hello everyone. This story takes place on the same piece of land referenced in my prior Let's Not Meet story, Horrifying Storage Unit Auction Experience, although this one took place almost 20 years prior. Back then, this parcel of land was owned by my dad and a business partner. It was essentially vacant, although we had taken on a few tenants who needed space to restore old sailboats or store industrial machinery. Being in a somewhat remote area, we were not immune to trespassers, and tenants would tell us about stolen tools or machinery parts often. This is where we met Dan. Dan came to my father much in the same way many others did. He had a boat restoration business and needed a place to work. He also asked if it would be okay if he slept on the property a few nights a week, under the guise of it saving him time commuting if he worked late on a project. This was mutually beneficial as Dan seemed like a decent guy and it would be nice to have a presence there overnight. We let him have a reduced rent rate as compensation for him generally keeping an eye on the place. A few months later, Dan had built himself a little compound, a series of 3 sea containers in a horseshoe configuration with a little trailer in the middle. Over the same period of time, we noticed that Dan didn't seem to work. There were never boats there, and Dan's a few nights a week became every night. Soon after, the excuses for why he didn't have rent started coming in. Effectively, we had invited a squatter into our property. Dan became the same kind of people we wanted him to keep out. Trying to look at the bright side, my dad and his partner were still okay with this as it was beneficial to have somebody there at all hours. The theft had gone down substantially and Dan's rent, even when paid in full, was not tipping any financial needles for us, so we let it be for the time. About a year later, Dan's mental health was starting to show its cracks. He went from polite to aggressive and bitter. He wasn't violent and was always very courteous to me personally. I was 23 at the time, but when he was asked about money and about rent, he would get defensive and start blaming my dad and his partner for why he couldn't pay. My dad wasn't afraid of anybody, but Dan made him nervous. My dad's partner had a friend who had recently dealt with a similar renter-turned-squatter situation, and when he called the police for assistance, he was thanked by the squatter with a bullet in his stomach. A few $1,000s back rent, or an eviction was not worth a gunshot to my dad, and we all felt that Dan was capable of snapping that way, so we just kept Dan busy doing cleanup and random tasks, which he always did, and remarkably well. One day my dad asked me to run to the site for him, as he was out of town. A tenant had called because it looked like somebody had tried to cut through a piece of our fence and wanted to get eyes on it. I pulled onto the property, where I was greeted by Dan. "Hey buddy," he yelled and waved. Dan was always very respectful to me, a courtesy that he had stopped showing my dad and his partner some time ago. "Hey Dan," I yelled back as I parked and got out of my car. "Come check this out," Dan replied and waited for me to step inside his little compound area. I was dying to see what was going on in there, honestly. I knew Dan was off, but I never felt intimidated or in danger. Just another weird guy. I walked over, and Dan brought me over to the next one of the sea containers. Look at this. This sea container had a roll-up door on the side instead of the typical latch and swing doors on the end. He rolls up the door to a wall. I look closer, and he has welded a metal wall 2 feet into the sea container. "What am I looking at, Dan?" "Skirt down the pathway to the left," he says and points. I look down the narrow pathway and see a small opening at the end, maybe 4 feet high and 3 feet wide. "Check it out." I should really not have gone in, but again, curiosity and that feeling of invincibility you have as a 23-year-old overshadowed my better judgment. I squeezed down the hall and through the door into the main hold of the sea container. The interior was painted deep red. Shag carpet had been poorly glued to the ground. On every wall and surface, broken pieces of mirror had been glued, and in the back, an old-style prison door had been welded in place, and behind it, a small round bed with shiny satin sheets. There are times when you can't really believe what you're seeing is real. The sensory overload of this enclosed place was too much. I don't know how long I stood there, but was snapped back to reality when Dan, standing right behind me, said, "I love to party in here." I hadn't even realized he followed me in. One good piece of advice my dad gave me when dealing with tricky situations was always, play along as long as you are safe until a moment comes that you can't get away fast and safely. I ran through the scenarios. I had done MMA and kickboxing in college. I'm not a small guy, but neither was Dan. Do I punch him and run and risk who knows what? Are there weapons hidden in here? I decided on the path of least resistance. "Wow, Dan, this place is sick. I'll bet with some weed and some music, you could just spend hours back here." "Yeah, man, you should come back and we can hang in here together. It'd be wild." His face softened like he had just found a friend who got it. "Look, Dan, I want to hang out, but I came here to meet my dad, and he should be pulling up right now, so I have to go." Dan shrugged, and I walked past him, squeezing through pathways until I was back outside. I calmly walked to my car, got in, and left. I relayed the whole story to my dad and his partner, who thought it was weird, but due to the fear of potential violence from Dan, both my dad and his partner weren't certain that Dan didn't know our home addresses. We didn't call the authorities. We did, however, keep a very close eye on Dan and actually brought in another tenant to stay the night and keep an eye on both Dan and the property. Eventually, Dan decided to move on. One day we showed up and his containers were being loaded out into a shipper, but he was nowhere to be found. He had moved on, leaving behind only sea container footprints and 3 dumpsters worth of garbage. I told the police this story after, along with his name, and they said they would keep their ears out, but not knowing where he went or if Dan was even his real name, there wasn't much they could do. In the time since, we have never had a visit from or heard from Dan. The only people I told this story to were my paintball friends at work, who would practice with me on this property and knew Dan since he was always there and coined the nickname Sex Dungeon Dan. This happened on the west coast of the United States back sometime between 2004 and 2005, and was by far the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. And looking back on it now, the dumbest thing I've ever done because of all the reckless mistakes that were made back then, and it still creeps me out every time I think about it. So, my roommate at the time had been chatting with a guy she met off at a party line. He invited her to his house to hang out, and since she didn't have a car, he offered to pick her up. She agreed, but didn't want to go to a man she never met's house alone. She asked if I could come along also, and I stupidly agreed to tag along because 1, I didn't want her to be by herself in case something bad happened, and 2, I didn't have anything else better to do, so why not? He said, yes, I can come too, and came to pick us up an hour and a half later around 8 p.m. at night. We met him outside in the parking lot. He was an older man in his 40s to 50s. We were in our early 20s. Fairly normal looking and seemed nice, so we chatted for a few minutes, then got in his car and drove off. He stopped to get gas, buy my roommate cigarettes, and buy our favorite liquor. He lived in an area that was almost 1 hour and 15 minutes away from where we lived. We call this area the Boondocks since it's mainly nothing but mountains, desert, wild animals, and poor cell reception. This should have set some alarm bells off, but no. We finally made it to his house, and he gave us a tour throughout his very nice 5-bedroom house. He decided to have some steaks and get in the jacuzzi. So far, everything is going fine, and we're all just talking, joking, drinking, laughing. He took us into the kitchen to make sides for the steaks. While on the way to the kitchen, we noticed pictures on the wall of kids and a wedding photo of him and his wife. He nonchalantly admitted he was married and his family was out of town, like it was not a big deal. Wow, okay, and this is when things start going downhill. He then proceeded to ask if we partied. We said, nah, we don't do other drugs, other than weed. He then brought out a huge bag of white powder and what I immediately assumed to be cocaine. He made a couple of lines on the kitchen counter and snorted them right in front of us. By this time, my roommates and my alarm bell started to go off loudly. Finally, right? And I started thinking of ways how we were going to get out of here. We had no cell phone reception, no car, and had no idea what his address was or exactly where we were at. It's about 1 or 2 a.m. now and he starts acting weird, talking loudly, cursing, and accusing us of stealing DVDs, specifically the Incredibles DVD, which he checked and was actually inside his DVD player. He kept saying he didn't remember my roommate wearing glasses earlier and accused her of stealing his wife's pair of eyeglasses. My roommate is basically blind without her glasses and wears them all the time, so I don't see how he didn't remember her wearing them when he picked us up. He then turned around and accused me of stealing the earrings I had in my ears. Of course, we are beyond ready to go. We told him to take us home. He yelled no, and he'll take us home when he gets ready to and asks if we want some pickles. Oh no, we just want to go home. After about 30 minutes of him ranting on about security cameras, how he has guns stashed everywhere in his house, pickles, and calling us bitches, he snorted another line and said he was going to take us home now. Normally, we wouldn't have gotten in a car with a cokehead driving, but we definitely didn't want to stay there a second longer. My roommate and I got in the back seat and he yelled, I'm not a freaking chauffeur, so one of you needs to get in the front seat now, or we are not going anywhere. So of course, since it was my roommate's chat buddy, she got in the front seat. He then started speeding down the highway, still yelling and ranting. I was hoping he would get pulled over by the highway patrol, but unfortunately that didn't happen. About 10 minutes away from our place, he suddenly started acting nice again, saying how much fun he had and we should all hang out again. Right, dude. Yeah. Never again. He basically jumped out of his car without saying anything, and about an hour later, he called my roommate and asked her if he wanted to go to the movies and out to eat later that day. She told him to F off and lose her number. We never called the police because we basically didn't know anything about this dude. Just that he snorted coke, was married, and lived somewhere in the middle of nowhere, but my roommate did tell me she called this house a month later, hoping his wife would answer so she could tell her everything that happened. But he answered, hung up, and ended up changing his number a few days later. Thankfully, we never saw or heard from him again. I was a cashier at a busy grocery store only a 5-minute walk from where my family lived. I knew several customers very well since I worked regular weekend shifts, and lots of people came in at the same time each week. I always worked Sundays from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. One Sunday afternoon was when I met this weird, creepy middle-aged man. He was with a woman and a young toddler the first time, so naturally, I thought they were a family. Nonetheless, I was my super friendly self. A lot of customers told me over the years that I made them smile or laugh. Maybe this was confused as flirting. I don't know. So anyhow, this man, despite his wife or girlfriend being there, was overly friendly with me right away. I noticed pretty quickly that he wouldn't take his eyes off me and held eye contact for way too long. He left and I brushed it off. Then at night around 9 p.m., when there was barely anyone in the store, he came alone when I was on break. I had another employee actually come upstairs to the break room, telling me that a customer was asking for me, by name. I didn't think anything of it because sometimes my friends came by or a customer came back because there was a mistake on their receipt. Cashier names were always listed on there. So of course it's this guy, but nothing is wrong. He came down to the grocery store not to complain or buy anything else, but to tell me he had a great interaction with me and that he sees great potential in my customer service skills and would like to go for coffee with him so that he can get to know me better. Professionally, of course. I politely declined and let him know I was in high school and had other professional plans for university. He becomes really pushy, saying it's never a bad thing to get your foot in the door. Can he at least get my number for when I'm finished university and looking for work? Keep in mind I'm 16 at this point. Who the heck asks that? I kept declining and then he offered to drive me home. It was late. I said no. I live close by, so I walked, and he started asking, "Oh, so what street do you live on?" "I live close by too." At this point, I can see another employee from a distance starting to wonder what's going on, and I'm getting creeped out and annoyed. My break was interrupted because of this guy after all, so I just say, "No thank you," over and over. Finally, he left, saying he'll be back next Sunday to see me because he sees great potential and won't let me go just like that. Red flags go off all over my head. Call my dad, tell him everything, and ask him to pick me up, even though we live super close, like not even a 2-minute drive. Obviously, he says yes, worried about me. When my dad picks me up, I noticed this guy in his car in the parking lot, waiting. More than an hour since we spoke. I, stupid me, didn't mention it to my dad because I'm 16 and still in denial that this could be a serious situation. When we start driving, I noticed that he is behind us, so finally I tell my dad. My dad drives straight and then circles around 2 different streets to see if he's following us, and yes, he is. My dad, being the European man that he is, gets out of the car to wreck this man, but the car speeds off. We wait a bit in my car as my dad debates calling the police, but decides not to. When we get home, he parks the car in the garage. The story doesn't end here, though. No. My parents try to force me to quit my job or just stop working Sundays, but I'm like, no, it's fine because who the heck knows? I was a stupid teenager. So nothing happens during my weekday shifts, and I basically forget about it. But the next Sunday night rolls around, and so does this weirdo. This time taking a photo of me with his phone. Kid you not, he took a photo of me as he approached my till. Laughed it off, saying, "I can't forget what you look like, right?" I was seriously shook but too nice to tell him off like I would have if it happened now. I don't remember the whole encounter, but he kept pushing for me to sit down with him privately because he owns a business and needs people like me. I was so uncomfortable and scared but tried to play it cool. My dad picked me up again that night. He wasn't in the parking lot this time. I stopped working Sundays and I gave my boss a description of the man. He came by one Sunday asking for me and was straight up told off by a supervisor, an older coworker and friend, telling him to never come back to the store or they would pursue legal action. I didn't see him again and I went off to university. Follow up. One weekend in my second year of university, I went shopping with my mom, and when we were sitting in the food court eating, I felt somebody staring at me, and I saw him. Sitting at a table maybe 8 or so tables away, with that same woman and child and more people glaring at me, his eyes, his face. He looked like he wanted to eat my soul. I told my mom, and we got up and left the mall right away. I didn't look back, but I haven't seen him since, and I hope I never do again. I know some people will say maybe he meant well and really was just an eager businessman or something, but there's nothing like the vibe of knowing somebody just isn't right in the head. Just a little bit of info about me. I'm 26, female, and kind of a tomboy. I grew up climbing trees and playing in the dirt. I've never touched a Barbie in my life. Back in the summer of 2002, I was 16. My then boyfriend asked me on a camping trip with him and his parents. I, being the tomboy that I was, graciously accepted. His parents planned out a weekend of us going, and we were planning on rafting, boating, swimming, the works. Paradise for me. They had an RV, and it was furnished with everything. I slept in the living or kitchen area on a makeshift bed, even though my boyfriend's parents didn't give a heck where I slept. I did it out of courtesy. Side note, we were out in the middle of the woods, a designated camping area. It was so quiet and peaceful. You could hear the river in the stillness of the night. It was soothing. I remember thinking to myself, I could live here forever. The next day was probably the most fun day of my life. We all went kayaking, which I have to say was awesome. And we swam, and then my boyfriend's dad cooked out. I can't remember the last time I had laughed so much and genuinely enjoyed myself. It seemed like the day flew by. Before I knew it, it was time for us to go to bed. We had a big day planned for the next day, and I was eager to get sleep just so I could wake up and do it all over. I remember laying awake though, and just staring at the ceiling. My boyfriend was snoring, and I laughed as quietly as I could. He snored very loudly. I got one last laugh before literally my life was changed forever. There was a tap on the side of the RV. It caught me off guard, and I wasn't even alarmed. I just thought it was a random noise. You know the ones, like a creak here and there, a sound of something settling. Whatever. The bottom line is that I wasn't scared or freaked out. I tried to sleep, but I heard another tap, and then I heard an unmistakable giggle. I thought maybe my boyfriend's parents were awake and getting some adult time, if you will, and I was thinking to myself, please let me fall asleep soon. Silence washed over the place. I hear the river, the ringing in my ears you get when it's dead silent. I had this sinking feeling in my stomach. I hear people say they get when something bad's about to happen. Well, I felt that at that moment. In the dead silence, I hear the giggle again, followed by a scraping sound coming from outside the RV. My heart jumped into my throat, and I felt tears in my eyes. When I get nervous and scared, I cry. Somebody was outside the RV, but I was literally scared stiff. I couldn't move a muscle, and the scraping sound continued. I whispered for my boyfriend, but he just kept on snoring. I was lying about 5 feet away from the main door, although there are about 2 doors at the front of the RV and one emergency one at the back. I kept watching the little square hole in the door, hoping nobody would come through. More silence. My heart is beating so fast. I'm afraid I'm going to have a heart attack. I tap my chest to try and calm myself. As I'm watching the square hole in the door, I see a small, delicate-looking hand almost appear from the darkness. I almost shriek out loud. The hand was of a girl, no doubt. I could see those fake press-ons and know them from any Walmart store. But that still didn't stop me from almost shitting myself. I sit up and I start screaming, and I mean wailing. My boyfriend's parents stagger into the room, and all I can do is point to the door. Boyfriend's dad goes to the open door, but there's a sudden crash, then he falls back inside, falling onto the couch. Out cold. A rock falls onto the floor, and that's when the boyfriend wakes up and starts shouting. The mom is going insane, tending to her husband. I am screaming, still in shock. Boyfriend is flipping his shit, and I eventually stop screaming. When I finally stop screaming, I hear the hysterical laughter from outside, followed by heavy footsteps on top of the RV. We're on the roof, on the roof. I hear a high-pitched, nasally voice tease from outside the RV. None of us had cell phones. It was 2002, and we were just now starting to get into the cell phone craze, but we had all magically managed to abstain somehow. The RV is rocking with somebody jumping up and down, and then there's a crash as somebody rams against the door frame. The girl outside is laughing and screaming. She's mocking me. The dad manages to sober up, grab a gun from one of the cupboards, open the door, and fire out into the darkness. The prancing on the roof stops immediately. The girl shrieking outside stops suddenly, and everything goes silent. I turn to look at my boyfriend. There's a window behind him, and I see the face, a hood drawn over his face. I know it was a man because I could make out the outline of a beard on his face, but that was it. The man raised a gloved hand and waved at me. I pulled my boyfriend away from the window and started screaming. The dad runs inside asking what's wrong. I look back at the window and the man is gone. He drove out of the campsite that night with a broken window. My boyfriend's dad went to the hospital with a minor concussion where the rock had hit him. Don't worry, my boyfriend's mom drove. The parents called the police the next morning and officers went out and searched the area. They didn't find anything. No other reports were ever filed after us. I had to go through counseling and therapy because I had trouble sleeping for about 2 years after it. My boyfriend and I broke up due to the stress I was going through from it actually. Eventually I started getting better. Then while I was in university, some girlfriend and I decided to go to the movies. There was a new one out called The Strangers. I decided to go because I had no homework. Turns out it was scary like the experience I went through, and I ended up having a panic attack in the middle of the theater and had to go to the hospital. A few months after that, I read a newspaper article where a woman was arrested at a campsite not too far away from where my boyfriend and his parents were that summer for vandalizing some tents and RVs. I don't know if it was the same girl. It didn't show her picture, but it made me wonder. As of 2012, I no longer go to therapy or have nightmares, but I do own several different types of guns, and if you knock on my door in the middle of the night, you better have a damn good explanation as to why you're there. Also, stay the heck off my roof. Thanks for being here, Reddit. My old house was a small house in a cul-de-sac in a small rural Australian town. The area wasn't bad, pretty quiet. Everybody kept to themselves. Due to the blistering heat, I liked to do a lot of gardening to make sure my lawn didn't die. I was out on the front lawn one day when I saw my neighbors were moving out. Their driveway ran up to the side of my house. It had a covered carport joined to my wall. The couple who rented the house were very nice. We said our goodbyes and I wished them well. Their old house lay empty for weeks. People came and people went, but nobody wanted to move in. Then one day I was fixing the sprinkler when a car drove into the neighboring driveway. 2 women in their late 50s got out of the front seats and helped a frail-looking woman of the same age from the back seat. The frail-looking woman was ushered into the house. One of the women got a cat from the back seat and put it in the house. One of them called to the lady inside. "The keys are on the side here, Rose." They closed the door and got back in the car. They saw me but ignored me as I made the attempt to say hello. They backed out of the driveway and drove off as fast as they could. A little while later, they returned in 2 separate cars. One was driving a small blue European car and the other was in the same car as earlier. The blue car drove up the driveway and stopped under the carport. The lady driving it got out, left the keys on the doormat and left, making sure to padlock the waist-tight metal gates on her way out. She got in the car and they left again. I looked at the car and saw it was full of clothes and a couple of cardboard boxes marked personal. A couple of weeks went by and everything was going as normal. I didn't see much of the lady next door. Her cat was wandering around the street. It was healthy and friendly. One day I heard the gates opening and saw the blue car reversing out of the driveway. A few hours later, she returned with groceries. Well, at least she is a functioning person. I was worried when I hadn't seen her since she moved in. I said to my wife. Life carried on as normal. Nothing unremarkable happened. We were all keeping to ourselves as normal, except for a wave and a hello every time we saw a neighbor in the street. One Tuesday evening, I was taking the rubbish out. I noticed every house had put their bins out for collection, but those of the new neighbor was still next to her house. I wandered over to let her know so she wouldn't have to wait another week. All of the lights in the house were off, but her car was inside the carport. The gate was locked, so I couldn't get to the front door to knock without hopping over, and I wasn't desperate enough to tell her that I would trespass. If she had chain locked the gate, she obviously didn't want to be disturbed. Besides this, she was probably asleep if the lights were off. I didn't want to look in the windows. I walked back down the driveway when I had an eerie feeling like somebody with ill intent was standing directly behind me. I quickly turned to see the old lady staring at me from the darkness of her living room window. "Hi, bin day tomorrow. Just came over to let you know. Every Wednesday morning." She continued to stare at me unflinching. I shrugged to myself and walked back to my home. Later that night, I was waiting for my wife to return from work. She is a tiny bundle of beauty who was born and raised in Hong Kong but has lived in Australia for the past 10 years. Suddenly, I heard panicked banging on the door. I got up to open the door. My wife pushed her way in as soon as the door was open. There's someone out there. A voice. I think it is a drunk person. It sounds like an indigenous man's voice. He was screaming at me. She was shaking as she told me. Being small, she was afraid of the voice, as she was worried she could not defend herself if she were attacked. What was he saying? I don't know. He was screaming something about being Asian, but I didn't understand the rest. I went out to check where the voice was coming from, and I couldn't hear anything, so I walked up and down the street to see if I could see anyone. Nobody was there. Over the next few nights, the same thing happened. Whenever my wife was on her own, she would hear a voice screaming obscenities at her. Each night got worse. The insults got more extreme, and the voice became louder. One night, I waited for her to return from work under my carport. When she reached the front of the house, I heard the voice for the first time. It was exactly as she had described to me. A loud voice in the night. It seemed as though if it was coming from the front lawn of our house. The voice echoed around us. It was almost impossible to discern the location. My wife ran to me and held me, searching for shelter in my arms. I told her to go inside and lock the door. She reluctantly did so while watching my every move from between two slats in the blind of our front room window. I walked around slowly, trying to look confident to my wife, but really I was praying I wasn't about to be ambushed by a foul-mouthed attacker. I heard the screaming again, but I still couldn't place where it came from. This person was attacking me and my family, calling us all kind of slurs. I'm not Asian, but my wife is, so you better cut your shit, I shouted back. The voice went silent. I stayed still, waiting for another outburst, but nothing came. I made my way back into the house and consoled my shaken wife. The next day we heard the voice screaming outside. It was late afternoon. This was the first time we heard the voice during the day. I was tidying a back room that looked over the back garden. I had the window open because it was winter. Winter in the Australian outback means normal summer temperatures in any normal part of the world. Suddenly, I saw the trellis that was on top of the fence dividing the garden being torn away. The lady from next door was pulling the sun-worn timber away and throwing it to the back of her garden, all the while screaming in the creepy voice we had been hearing for the past couple of weeks. It was definitely an indigenous accent, but it wasn't a man's. It was the voice of a woman that had chain-smoked for 40 years. I went into the garden, but she had already gone back inside. Knowing the fence belonged to the property she was in, I knew that I couldn't report her to the police for destruction of property. It was her fence. At least the property owners. I went back inside the house and heard the screaming start again. After half an hour of non-stop screaming, some neighbors from the opposite side of the street approached her house. Suddenly the screaming stopped. I didn't hear what was said, but it worked. Yet again a few minutes later, the screaming continued. You hear me, guys? You better be the best. You better be the best if you want to mess with my family. You took my brother. Today. I don't appreciate you. My brother was a good man. The absolute best. Freaking jerks. I lost a family today. My wife left for work while the screaming was still going. She pleaded for me to call the police. Called them after she left, but they told me they didn't have the staff for domestic disturbances. It was a small town, so I understood they might be busy elsewhere. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I walked towards the neighbor's gates. The shouting seemed as though it was coming from outside the house, but nobody was there. You hear me? I lost a family member today. You hear me, guys? I don't appreciate you. You do not mess with me. The voice of the old woman wavered between the usual screams and a grave snarl, like a dog baring its teeth and growling as I approached the gate. I tried to look around for the source of the noise. The front of the property was dark, and inside the carport was pitch black. I shook the locked gate and noticed it was still chained shut. To my left, I saw a kitchen knife buried to its hilt in the bare red dirt that was her front garden. Then I saw another knife stabbed into the trunk of the mango tree that stood lonely in the garden. You hear me, guys? The voice snarled at me. A lot quieter than before, but it was a lot more menacing. You've got a nerve to show your face around here after what you did to my family. If you thought what you did was bad, you haven't seen what I'll do to you. You think you'll walk away? I don't think so. My uncle is here, my brother is here, and they are not happy. They will see my revenge. She growled again. I still have no idea where she was, so I called out to her. Hey, are you okay? Obviously, she wasn't okay, but heck, I couldn't think of any other way to initiate a conversation. Suddenly, a shadowy figure of an old lady stood up. She had been out of sight, sitting in the shadows behind her blue car in the pitch black of her carport. Come, so I can see you," she snarled. "I'm just at your front gate. I wanted to see if you are alright. There has been a lot of shouting and I wanted to see if you're okay." I knew the shouting was her. I knew that she didn't have another person around. I was hopeful I could tell her to stop shouting, and that would have been it. The lady approached me as I spoke. She moved slowly as if she had knee problems. I saw her face, and it was weathered. She was smoking a cigarette that was burning her fingers. She realized it instinctually and let it roll away in the breeze. "You okay, sweetheart?" I asked again. Suddenly, she spoke, but her voice changed completely. She spoke in the tone of an elderly lady selling cakes at church. Her voice was softer, and she seemed apologetic. "Listen, I'm sorry. I've been having a few problems," she explained. She continued to approach me, and I noticed yet another knife. A paring knife lying in the shadows in her path where she made her way toward me. I stepped back from the gate. I didn't want to be within arm's reach of her. "Yeah, I noticed," I replied to her. She giggled to herself as she crouched down to pick up the paring knife. I prayed that the sore knees weren't an act, and I would need the head start to get back to my front door, open it, and lock her out before she could catch me if she did go all Norman Bates on me. She reached the gate and stretched out her arm to shake my hand. "Shake my hand," she said sweetly. "No, I'm all right here, thanks," I told her, backing away another half step. "Why are you so rude? You look like a nice boy. People first meet, it's polite to shake hands," she said in a voice that sounded almost upset. "Like I said, I'll just stay here. You have a knife in your hand, and I'm not that comfortable with." "What, this?" she said, brandishing the knife. She stabbed into the wooden fence post the gate was attached to. It stood there handle up, and while I stared at it, I felt this woman's gaze staring right through me. I snapped back to see her, staring at me. "Listen, do you live next door? I've been having a bit of trouble. I buried 2 members of my family this week, as well you know, and I'm having a bit of trouble as they are still with me, and if you hear me singing out, then just ignore me. I sing out and I am talking, and that is none of your business. You have no right to come to my gate and tell me who to speak to and how to speak to them. They are my family and it is not your business. I am talking to them and that has nothing to do with you. Do you understand?" She was angry now and I stepped back. "I understand, and I wasn't aware you had lost your family recently, but you are disturbing us and you're scaring my wife." I tried my best to sound scarier than her, but I don't think she was listening to me at this point. "Listen, what's your wife's name?" "That's not the issue," I replied. "What's your name?" she asked. "What's yours?" I countered. "My name is Rose. Listen, I've been seeing people come around here, and they go in and out of your house when you go out. They mean you harm. They mean me harm too. My uncle and brother are with me, and they already harmed them. Listen, you need to look after your wife, because if someone kills you, they will kill her next. And they won't be as kind to her as they will be to you. You will die quickly. She will really feel the power. It will take hours, and you will watch with me. Yeah, I'm going now. Stop shouting because it's disturbing us. Stop scaring my wife. Good night." I wanted to get around to telling her to keep the noise down in a friendly way. The first request is polite. Hopefully that would put a stop to it. I should have known that this wasn't a rational person I was dealing with before I went over. As I walked away, I kept an eye on her. She took the paring knife out of the post and put it in her pocket. I called the police and reported the whole thing. About an hour later, they arrived. Because there had been a knife involved, they took it seriously. Upon their arrival, the sweet old lady side of her was the only thing they saw. The police told me that there wasn't an issue as far as they were concerned, and that they would not be attending again. I asked if they had seen the knives I had told them about. They claimed there were no knives sighted. The screaming continued every night for hours, sometimes until the early hours of the morning, sometimes only for a few hours in the evening. I requested the police to come out every night, but they said they would come if they had a free moment in their patrols. I called all of the letting agents that covered the area and found out that somebody had bought the house in Rose's name, so she was the owner. I couldn't even make a noise complaint to the letting agent because she was the owner. I called the mental health department at the hospital and was told that because the office was only staffed by one person, they don't do house calls and only evaluate people brought in by police. I recorded her screaming on my phone and took it to police the next morning, who said they couldn't do anything. I told them I literally feared for the lives of my wife and myself. They said they couldn't detain her for a mental health evaluation until she had committed a crime, like stabbing us. I asked if anyone else had complained, and she said that mine weren't the only complaints, but that everyone had been given the same answer. pair of cops came around on their own accord and witnessed firsthand the screaming and the knife stabbed in the grounds around the property. They warned me to stay away from her, but there was nothing that they could do, as stabbing a knife into your own garden isn't a crime. They asked her to keep it down, and she turned into the sweet old lady again. A month of her screaming later, my wife and I arranged to move to a different house. On our last day, she started to talk to me from her gate as I packed the truck. "You are in a lot of trouble, you know. You two are in a lot of danger now. You do not appreciate the trouble you are causing. You should not be leaving me, and you should not leave me. You hear me? You will carry my burden, and you will carry it with you. Because when they come for me, I will point them straight at you. Move over, Ivan Milat. There is a new psycho in town." This is one of those situations in which we'll probably never know what was really going on. It's haunted us for years. My mom and I were on our way to Nashville, and we'd stop over the Kentucky line at one of those big off-ramp service stations, Pilot, Love's, etc., for a bathroom break. She and I were in different stalls, and not long after we were situated, I heard the door open again. I couldn't see them, but it sounded like the footsteps of a woman and a child. They went into the handicap stall together, and though the child never said a word, the woman never stopped talking. It wasn't her incessant chattering that grabbed my attention, though. It was what she was saying. "You are beautiful. Did you know that? Aren't you just the prettiest girl in the world? Mama." Can you say mama? I'm your mom. You are just so sweet and beautiful. You really are. They were only in there for a minute or so. I could hear her blathering on at the sinks, but when I flushed the toilet and opened the door, she quickly grabbed the little girl by the hand and pulled her out. I got a good look at the child, but only saw the woman from the back. I felt deeply unsettled. I'm standing there washing my hands, mulling over what had happened. When Mom joined me, I felt kind of silly, like I was overreacting, but then Mom goes, "Are you listening to that?" Yes. I was so glad she felt it too. Wasn't that really weird? We talked about it for a few seconds and wondered if we should tell someone. But what would we say? Nothing bad had technically happened. The child hadn't looked or acted scared either. Back in the store, nobody was frantically running around searching for their child. There were video cameras up that would catch most everything. The woman had been strange, but it didn't feel like she was hiding the child or on a time crunch. We grabbed drinks and paid, but as we got out to the car, we saw them again. As it turned out, they were parked next to us, and we couldn't get in until they closed their doors. This time, they were accompanied by a middle-aged, unkempt man. He was barking orders at them, trying to move them along, and the little girl was staring down at her shoes. She looked sad. When he saw us standing at our car, he glared and muttered under his breath, but I didn't know if that was for our benefit or theirs. Their car was full of crap. The rear window was packed full of papers, clothes, and garbage, and the passenger side back seat had clothes or hangers dangling down in front of the window. There was very little room in the back for the girl. The couple ushered her into the car and then quickly hung a blanket in the other window, effectively blocking her from view. Nobody from the outside could see into the back seat where the child was sitting. They pulled out of there like a bat out of hell, but I managed to memorize the license plate. I wasn't even consciously trying to. Everything just happened so fast. Mom pulled out a piece of paper and we jotted it down, as well as the make, model, and color of the vehicle. At first we felt silly calling the police after all. We were still going on feelings. They hadn't really done anything wrong. Although the rear window obstruction could have gotten them in trouble, people can do things that look crazy out of context. We did call though. The local police turned us over to the state police, who took our information, but they didn't want to come and talk to us any further. In fact, they acted like they were a little bit put off over the call. After telling them the story, we felt like the weird ones or Karens before we called them Karen. I was embarrassed, but it still felt right to do. Once we reached Nashville, we actually watched the news, wondering if we would see any reports about an abduction. Nothing. I've done a few searches over the years, but haven't uncovered anything or anyone who would have physically matched the age and gender of the child. I felt conflicted about calling the police because it felt so invasive. I'm generally a stay-in-your-own-lane kind of person. Chances are that this was an innocent situation. New foster parents, adoption, or just weird people doing weird stuff. But still I wonder. This happened around 2000 or 2001, so many years ago. It was summer break and my family, didn't go on any trip, unlike every break. I was just 8 years old and my younger sister was 3. We were playing along with other kids who lived in the same building as us, just on different floors. The building is not exactly an apartment building. It's more of a multi-storied house. The front gate is a bit further from there and the only entrance and the exit to the building. So since we were downstairs and playing, anybody who would enter or exit the building would be visible to us and we would greet them because every tenant knows us and we know them, as well as their family members who might visit them. A new person visiting any tenant is rare but not impossible. Right adjacent to the big entrance gate is a small old-style window with a grill, but it has a small opening at the bottom. We were all playing, but then I got tired and sat on one of the chairs placed at the porch-like place. Not sure what to call it, to be honest. From where the window thingy falls on my right side, I can see it as well as the gate clearly. I was just looking out when I noticed a man staring at the gate. So, basically, he was able to look at my sister and friends through it. It concerned me when I realized that he wasn't even trying to look away and was just staring at them blankly. I turned around from where I was sitting to signal my friend to move to the other side, away from his sight, which she didn't understand. Frustrated, I turned back and was about to stand up when my gaze fell on the guy and he was now staring at me. My body froze and I could feel fear creeping up on me. I couldn't move. I don't know why I stared back at him and suddenly he started smiling. And when I say smiling, I mean full-on grinning from ear to ear. That scared the soul out of me, and I mustered some courage, got up, and ran towards my friends. I didn't tell them anything and just asked them to go upstairs with me, which thankfully they did without questioning. I didn't tell them anything about this to my parents because I thought they would stop me from going downstairs to play. The next day, we again came to play and I looked through the window just to make sure he wasn't there. Fortunately, he wasn't, or so I thought. 15 minutes in, and I spot that guy again. He was again standing at the very spot and staring at us. At me. I tried to play it cool because my friends knew nothing about him, but I couldn't for long, and we went back again. From what I remember, this happened for 3 to 4 days, and now my friends started complaining about how I don't let them play, and they have to come back earlier than they are supposed to. On the 5th day, or 4th, I don't remember correctly, I made up my mind to not pay attention to him and just focus on playing. We were playing cricket that evening, and I was batting. I hit the ball hard, causing it to go over the gate, which was a normal thing. And as per rules made by us, the one responsible must fetch the ball. My heart started beating hard because I could see his grin getting wider and creepier. He went towards the ball on the road and picked it up. He then held his hand out, gesturing me to come and take it. I was scared at this point, but I had to go, so I did. As soon as I reached to take the ball from his hand, he bent, coming closer to my ear, and his words are still ringing clearly in my ears to this day. I'm a good man. Look at the window when you go inside. I'll leave something for you. This is a rough translation in English, but it sounded much worse. That sent shivers down my spine, and I ran with the speed of light. After we were done playing, I saw him sliding a piece of paper from that little opening. He then looked at me, grinned, and waved goodbye. I grabbed the paper and opened it. He had written his phone number and asked me to call him at 2 sharp in the afternoon and said that he knew my parents would be asleep by that time. It was also written that if I didn't do it, my friends' lives would be in danger. As an 8-year-old, I didn't know any better, so I called him through my mom's phone. He picked up the call and I didn't have the courage to say anything, so I was quiet. He said, "You're a good girl just like me. You should come stay with me. Come outside, I'm waiting to pick you up." Because I lived upstairs, I went to the balcony and he was actually standing near the gate, looking directly at me, waving and smiling. I couldn't contain it anymore, so I started crying and disconnected the call. I ran inside and bawled my eyes out in my room. Thankfully, my mom didn't wake up and I cried it all out. I didn't go out for the next few weeks and everybody kept asking me about it. I still didn't tell them though. That guy stopped coming too. I don't remember the time he stopped coming, but he did, and I was relieved. Eventually, this experience started fading and I grew up. Fast forward to 10 years, I was 18 and my mom asked me to buy some snacks. I took my sister and went out. The shop I had to go to was at the end of the road several houses away, so not too far. I was standing in a queue when I left. I was standing in a queue when I felt uncomfortable because the man standing behind me kept pushing me. Annoyed, I looked at him only to realize it was the same man. My face went pale and I could feel my heart throbbing in my throat. Trying not to panic and calm myself down by telling myself that he couldn't do anything in public, that there were tons of people there, and that gave me a sense of security. As soon as my order came, I took out my wallet hastily to pay, but he beat me to it. The owner looked at him weirdly and then at me because I was a regular there and he was seeing this man for the first time. I paid for it anyway, and the owner politely asked him to take his money back. I gave the bag to my sister and asked her to go home and to inform our mom about a man following us. Just in case he attacks, I'll have a backup and she would be safe too. Our house is within the vision range of the shop, so I waited for her to get inside, and now it was my turn to go home. As soon as I stepped out, the man followed me and said something like, "You're a beautiful lady now. Let's catch up." Again, rough translation. I kept walking and walking, but now that we were far from the shop, he started his speed walking and I had to walk faster. I could feel goosebumps all over my body. I started running and I could see him catching up to my speed when the owner called for him loudly, saying that some of his money was still at the counter and asking him to come back, which gave me enough time to get inside and lock the gate. I haven't seen him since that day and it's been 2 years. I'm 20 right now and I hope to never meet him anywhere in the future. I hope I never see him again, and I don't know why it has instilled a paranoia in me, and I dread seeing him when I turn 28. Edit. I told my mom everything after that. Because my dad lives in another city for work, I didn't tell him since it would make him very worried and possibly affect his work. My distant uncle is a local cop. He's quite close and trustworthy. We tried finding the creepy guy after that, but couldn't. He literally vanished in thin air. We also asked the shop owner about him, but he said the guy came back, took his money, and went away. Nobody else paid enough attention to this guy, so we couldn't find anything. I go to college by public transport, so I have to walk around 1 kilometer to reach the stop. I take the other road, which is opposite to the road that leads to the shop. It takes longer comparatively, but I feel better at least. Not once have I seen that guy or felt anything creepy since then, which is a relief. But again, I'm kind of paranoid every time I step out, though I do carry pepper spray and a sharp keychain with me all the time. About moving out, we cannot afford that just yet, possibly after I complete my degree, which still has 3 years left. I've been lurking on here for a while and meaning to share this incident on here for a while. I'm ill and off work today, so I decided today's the day. Illness may cause some typos, however, so please accept apologies in advance. I have had more than my fair share of creepy encounters, but this one was particularly dramatic. One where I really did feel my life was in danger. Names have been changed to protect the dignity of my 2 cousins, who are now self-conscious teens who I know occupy Reddit. I was on holiday visiting my family in South Asia. Having been born and brought up in England, a lot of things over there are quite foreign to me, relevant for later on. My parents and I were staying in my uncle's apartment. My aunt and uncle were at work, and my parents had gone away for a day trip to visit relatives in a neighboring town, leaving me at home with my 2 cousins, Hamish and Adam. Adam was 8 years old at the time, and Hamish was 3. I was about 12 or 13. Adam and Hamish always argued about everything. If one wanted a particular cereal at breakfast, an argument would break out over breakfast choices. Adam is stupid for wanting Cocoa Pops. My Shreddies are so much better. I'm not even going to sit here and eat while he eats that horrible rubbish, while playing with a toy. Let's make the doll swim in the lake. No, it's not a lake, stupid, it's the sea. And so on. In short, I was very used to them disagreeing and squabbling and couldn't remember any time they were in harmony, especially over playtime. This may seem like a digression, but it is relevant background information for later on. On this particular day, Hamish was in the living room building a Lego boat. He had been working on this boat for a few days now. Adam had gone outside to play with his friends on the street. He left the door slightly ajar so he could come and go. It was a hot and humid day as usual, so I went to take a shower. I was sitting in my room drying my hair when Hamish came running to me in tears. "Tashina, my boat, it's broken." "What?" "My Lego boat. Somebody stepped on it and broke it." "Oh." He grasped my hand and led me to the living room where the boat was snapped. He was very upset. It had been his pride and joy, and so I commiserated and reassured him that all hope was not lost. It shouldn't take too long to fix. I thought he must have broken it himself by accident, perhaps stepping on it and not realizing he had been working on the floor, with the boat sitting on the living room rug. With Hamish finally placated and back to work on his boat, I went back to my room. A few minutes passed without incident. I could hear Hamish moving around, and I heard Adam come back inside and go to the living room. I got a book and curled up on the bed. It was a lazy, drowsy sort of day. And then all of that was shattered. Adam and Hamish came charging into my room, almost tripping over each other. Tashina, Tashina. Hamish ran to me. Adam paused to slam the bedroom door closed behind him. There's a man in the living room. He's wearing a mask and he had a knife. He must have been the one who broke my boat. Wait. I looked at the pair of ashen faces, completely solemn. Are you playing some sort of game right now? No. He's wearing a horribly scary mask and he has a knife. I got up slowly, still not sure whether they were messing with me, play acting, and this was some sort of pretend game. Where? In the living room, said Adam, pointing. He's wearing a mask? Yeah, like a Halloween one, with a big scary smile on it, said Adam. Smile showing teeth, said Hamish, nodding along furiously. And he had a knife, said Adam. A big one, said Hamish. Yeah, said Adam. They both looked entirely serious and terrified, looking at me with their upturned, earnest, and pleading faces. I think more than anything, it was the fact that they agreed upon the description of this man and what he was carrying that really cemented for me the fact they were telling the truth. If this had been some sort of pretend game, they would have disagreed by now, trying to outdo each other in what he was wearing or the weapon he was carrying. Instinctively, I went to the door. I wasn't sure why or to achieve what purpose, I guess. I still wasn't scared. I knew they were telling the truth, but could there be an innocent explanation? They were overexcitable kids. My hand went to the door handle. No, said Adam in a hiss, and they both came running towards me, their hands clawing at me. Don't go out there. Wait. Okay, so let me get this straight. He was in the living room? They nodded. What was he doing? How did you manage to escape? Did he threaten you? I was sitting on the sofa to watch TV, said Adam. Hamish was on the floor with his boat. The man came in and we saw the knife in his hands. What happened then? Was he pointing it at you? No, it was just in his hands. As soon as we saw him, he just ran and came to you. The living room has two doors. One that leads to a corridor that basically snakes around the front of the building, and the other one leads to a corridor to the inside of the apartment. The boys had taken this latter doorway, with the man presumably standing by the first one. The story did indeed make sense. It had come so suddenly, and it was taking me a while to actually process the seriousness of what they were telling me. There was an intruder inside the apartment with a knife, and I was the oldest, and I was in charge. They had come to me for protection. Oh man, what do I do? Okay, let's not panic. What we need to do is to phone the police. Mobiles were still not common in this era. The only phone in the apartment was the landline, and luckily it was right outside my room. It was on the table in the corridor facing the door to my room. Unlucky, however, it was not a cordless phone. However, if the cord were long enough, I might be able to grab the whole thing, pull it inside, and close the door. I rehearsed this in my mind. I need to get to the phone so we can call the police. No, the man won't get you, said Hamish, clinging to my arm. He might be in the corridor, said Adam. We were all suddenly whispering, I realized. Well, we can check, I said, my hand going for the handle. No, hissed Adam. He grabbed my hand. It's dangerous. Look, I'll just peek, okay? If he's there, I can quickly close the door. Adam eventually, though reluctantly, agreed. I turned the handle slowly. My stomach felt tight as I did so. The tension of the boys standing next to me did not help matters. I eased the door away from its frame, pulling it as slowly and noiselessly as possible. When it was slightly ajar, I pressed my face into the gap and looked around. The corridor was dark and empty. Okay, I said, turning to face the boys. There's no one there. I'm going to sneak outside and grab the phone and come back. Okay? As soon as I get back in with the phone, you close the door behind me. It's only a couple of steps to the phone. It'll just take a few seconds. Don't worry, okay? Adam was a mess, wringing his hands, pleading with me not to go. Hamish stood stoic, nodding. I pulled the door open further and stepped outside. Hamish and Adam crowded into the space I had just vacated, peering out of the doorway to watch me. As I stepped outside into the empty, quiet corridor, I began to feel silly. Could this just be the boys' active imagination? Had they been seeing something on TV and become convinced it was real? Maybe I was being stupid. Maybe there was nobody here. I was feeling much calmer and incredulous about the situation. Still, I knew it was possible. Better to be safe than sorry. I would take the phone inside and call my uncle to come home. I stepped up to the table and looked at the phone, quickly assessing it. I tugged on the cord that plugged into the wall. Yes, it should be long enough to take inside. I picked up the whole thing and looked up. He was standing there, wearing a clown-like grinning mask, and he had a knife in his hand surely. I don't think I need to tell you it was the most stomach-dropping, terrifying moment. The shock and fright felt like somebody had just smacked my face. I couldn't even scream. I dropped the phone and just leapt back to the door, charging back inside the room, slamming into Adam and Hamish as I did so. All three of us banged the door shut. Adam and Hamish stood, leaning against the door, and I dragged my bed into adrenaline-fueled frenzy over to the door to barricade it. There was no lock on the door. Would the bed be strong enough? Heavy enough? I began piling everything I could think of onto the bed to make it heavier. Hamish and Adam wordlessly joined in. The books, the bookshelf, all my bags, my suitcase, my clothes, the clock and everything. And then we all sat down on the bed, clambering onto it, leaning against the upper part of the door to make sure it couldn't open. Now that all this was still, we just looked at each other. Adam began to cry. Not Hamish, the younger one, but Adam, just bawling in a thin, whiny voice. "Wow, we're going to die," he wailed. No, we are not going to die," I said, though my heart was still pounding painfully against my chest and in my ears. I was going to be sick. I was shaking. Hamish was just sitting quietly next to me, his little hands folded across his chest. "We're going to die," Adam said again. Okay, calm down, guys. What can we do?" I thought about it frantically. He can't stay there forever. We'll just wait until he goes away. I don't think I'll ever forget that image. Little Hamish, 3 years old, sitting next to me looking solemn. His legs out in front of him, clad in those little jeans with his hands clasped in his lap. His back is leaning against the door. Adam was on the other side of me. His knees pulled to his chest, tears streaming down his face, making whimpering noises. All of us in a row barricaded against the door. We could hear footsteps in the corridor occasionally. The time pressed on, but our tension didn't wane. With every passing second, we expected to hear a thud on the door. The man trying to get in. Thankfully, it didn't happen. We eventually heard my aunt come in, talking in the corridor, wondering where we were, calling us. It was amazing, but there was a tinge of dread in case the man was still in the apartment, in case he might attack her. We, all three of us, clambered off of the bed and pulled it away from the door, hastily running outside. We told her what happened and we searched the place, emboldened by the presence of an adult. There was no sight of the man. The frustrating thing was, though my aunt and uncle, when he got back from work, didn't believe us at all. She thought we were flat out lying for entertainment, which I found particularly undermining, given that at 12 or 13 years old, immature for my age, I would never make up something as serious as that. First, she laughed and rolled her eyes, waving us away. When we persisted and repeated, insisting it really did happen and we were telling the truth, she eventually grew tired and told us to stop. I still find it astonishing how lightly they sometimes take the complaints of children. We were shaken up for the rest of the day and felt very indignant, having been just shooed away after something so terrifying had happened. When my parents got back, we told them, and it was some solace that they did indeed take us seriously. They knew that it was completely out of character for me to just dream up or lie about something like that. My aunt and uncle, however, still didn't agree. Later in the evening, we were getting ready to go out to dinner. We heard my aunt cry out in surprise, and my uncle rushed to go and see what had happened. It turns out all of her jewelry was gone. That was when they finally did indeed believe that we had been telling the truth and there had indeed been an intruder. When I was about 16, 9 years ago, my family was living in a suburban area outside of LA. It was a nice neighborhood. Kids rode their bikes in a group, parents waved to each other, and people helped keep an eye on houses. You could even join a barbecue if you walked by at the right time. Well, my dad was working nights at a hospital in the city and left me, female 16, my mom, female 36, and my sister 12, and my brother 8, home at night from 6:30 p.m. to 7:30 a.m. the next day. One night we were cooking and listening to music and all just around having a good night, and everyone's in bed by 9. I am woken up to the sound of our front door being rattled and my mom calling for my dad like he is home. Our house was laid out like this. There was a front door and a small entryway, and the right side wall, facing the door from outside, was my brother's room. My sister and I were on the other side of him, and the doorway led into our dining room. My mom's house was all from the living room towards the back of the house, so they typically turned on lights to come by our rooms. It wasn't all that uncommon for my dad to get let off of a shift a few hours early and end up home before 7. My front door was frosted glass in the middle that was clear enough that we could see whoever was at the door. It was old and a little off, so typically you had to put a little more force into opening the door, even if it were unlocked. This part my mom filled in. She had gotten up, also hearing the door, and thought my dad was home as I did. However, upon calling out for my dad to confirm and turning on the light switch, whoever it was at the door froze and noticeably jumped. She had still been walking closer to the door to open it to help him, still asleep, when she realized the man in the doorway was as tall as my dad but had a full head of hair, as well as his outline not matching the familiar outline of my dad coming home in the scrubs. This man was wider than my dad, and once he could see my mom in the doorway, he started not only turning the knob, but also throwing himself against the frosted glass. Okay, back to what I know. I don't know what kept me from rolling over and going back to bed, but in the next few seconds, I heard my mom scream and sat up in time to hear the footsteps and see her as she disappeared into her bedroom to come back out with the revolver my dad had bought for her birthday. At this point, I had rolled over and checked my cell phone quickly to see it was 1:30 in the morning and had dialed 911 while my mom was pointing the gun at whoever was at the door, trying to force their way inside. "Stop, or I'll shoot you. I'm on the phone with the police and they're on their way. I will use force if you enter my home." My mom was screaming it at the huge man at the door, who, after hearing her the second and the third time, finally stepped back from the door and was just staring at our shapes from the other side of the frosted glass. After a moment's thought, he seemed to like his chances because he had stepped forward again and only ran once my mom pulled the pin back and repeated what she had been saying, adding that she might decide to not even wait for him to be inside. He ran off, as I mentioned, and I stayed on the phone with 911 as my mom stood at the doorway, her gun still in both hands, aimed at the door the way my dad had taught her to hold it just the weekend before when we'd all gone to the range. It was only a moment after the man had fled that two uniformed officers filled the doorway the man had just been in, and when they knocked, I realized, after she didn't respond to them identifying themselves, how terrified my mom was. Her voice shook as she told the officers that she had a weapon, but that she wanted to hear their badge numbers before she would open the door, so I could confirm with the dispatcher. Once they did, she opened the revolver and unloaded it, putting it on the table and crying as I opened the door for the police. They took our statements, of course, had several patrol cars out looking, and found him a few hours later 6 blocks from our home. However, he made it to the residence he was trying to break into, and they caught him in the middle of robbing the retired couple he had knocked unconscious. This happened back in the 90s when I was still in primary school, so I really had no clue how much danger I was in. I would have been around 11 years old, living in a regional city in Australia. For the last year, I had been having a lot of trouble at school, getting bullied a bit by classmates and feeling really singled out by my teacher. My mom worked around the corner from my school, so when everything would get too much at school, I would literally just walk out of class, down the road, and onto her work site. It would take me about half an hour to walk there along a main road. A couple of times, I noticed a small white car drive past me slowly, but I only noticed this because I would see the same car go up and down the street as I was walking and while I was sitting outside of my mom's work site. After a while, I started seeing the same car driving up my street at home and parked along the streets that my brother and I would ride our bikes around on. I don't remember thinking it was strange because it was a small town and it wasn't unusual to see the same cars or people. It was just like, oh, there goes that car again. Anyways, my family followed a serious routine. Mondays, swimming and tutoring. Tuesdays were netball training. Wednesdays were netball games. Thursdays were basketball training. And Fridays, we would go and see professional basketball or football depending on the season. Saturday was my brother's basketball game, and Sundays were our day to go to the river with our friends for swims and a barbecue lunch. Never changed unless somebody was sick. So one Friday night, I am dressed and ready to go to watch the basketball game, but I can't find my shoes. I am pretty sure they are in the car, which is in a garage under our 2-story house. To get it, I have to walk down the outside steps at the front of the house, which has a full view of the road. I walk out the front door, and at the end of our driveway is a small white car. Now, I have never taken that much notice of white cars up until this point, and it wasn't uncommon for cars to park in this exact spot or our neighbors, but I just got a sinking feeling in my stomach when I looked at it. I kept walking down the stairs, and as I got close to the bottom, the driver's side door opened and a man gets out quickly. I keep walking towards the garage, and he starts moving towards our driveway. That was the point when something inside me just told me to scream for my parents and to run and lock myself in the car. I did exactly that, and this guy, who was halfway up my driveway at this point, turned around, ran back to his car, and drove off. By the time my parents came out, there was no evidence that this had happened, and they didn't believe me. A week later, there was a notice in our school's newsletter about a man in a white car attempting to abduct another child from my school on the same night. My parents were very shaken and took me seriously after reading that. I don't believe he was ever caught, but it definitely taught me to listen to my intuition and take notice of my surroundings. On April 30th, 2019, I was staying at the Crossroads Hotel in Kansas City. I was there for 2 weeks for work, but with nothing to do over the weekend and no friends in town. At around 9 p.m., I decided to have a drink at the bar by myself. I had just ordered my first beer. I emphasize ordered here. I had not even received the drink. Therefore, I was not drunk, and my mental state was still sober, and a girl tugged on my shirt. He was really attractive, and I was single at the time, so I turned to say hello. She whispered in my ear that the man next to her was being really creepy, and if I could help her out and pretend to be her boyfriend, she would buy me a drink. I will be honest, I thought this was just a line, but I obliged because frankly, she was hot. But there really was an old man, late 50s or early 60s, rocking back and forth in his chair, eyes half open, clearly 2 sheets to the wind, and he was in a tuxedo. I asked him about the tux, and he said that his daughter just got married that day. The wedding party had a room block at the hotel, and he was keeping the post-reception tab open at the bar. At this point, he started hitting on the girl, who we will call Rachel, saying how beautiful she was and how lucky I was to have such a beautiful girlfriend, and staring at her. I really felt for her and all women, honestly, in that moment. Then Rachel wrapped her arms around my waist and said, "Yep, this is my boyfriend. I love him to death. I'd kill for this guy." The guy rocks back and forth in his chair and then goes, "I get it. I've killed for love before, too." We looked at each other. I thought I misheard him. I'm sorry, what'd you say?" I said I have killed for love before. For the next 10 minutes, he proceeded to tell us about the supposed murder he committed. It was his ex-wife's boyfriend from what I could tell. He was divorced, probably reluctantly. His wife remarried and he got jealous of the guy. How he killed him with a Glock 37 shot 3 times, twice in the chest and once in the head. And what he did with the body: wrapped the body in black plastic bags, went fishing in the lake behind his house one morning, and threw it overboard with weights tied to the legs. I could tell he was growing suspicious of us asking so many questions, so I figured it was time to leave. Then I was actually proud of this. I actually got his name. I said, "It was nice to meet you, mister." And he filled in the blank. The next morning, I asked the front desk manager, who I have become friends with over the years of traveling there, if there was someone staying there with that name. She said she couldn't give me a room number for security reasons, but confirmed that somebody was staying there with that name. I called the Kansas City Police Department tip hotline and I told them everything I knew. I have a tipster ID number and everything. I checked maybe once a month or so to see if there had been any arrests, but no dice so far. I really thought this guy was messing with me, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought maybe not. I could totally see somebody having this weight on their heart, feeling vulnerable at their daughter's wedding, being drunk enough to feel untouchable, and trying to get it off their chest. His one mistake was that I was sober at the time and remember everything. Send a PM if you know of any unsolved murders that match this description. This happened a few years ago between my first and second years of grad school. It was summer and I had scored a last-minute internship with a small ad agency several states away from where I lived. Luckily, I have family who live in the same city, so I was able to stay with my aunt, uncle, and cousin for the 2 months I was interning. My relatives are great and a lot of fun to hang out with. This was the summer Pokemon Go came out, and we got a lot of mileage out of that one. All the same, I was still a 20-something extrovert in a new city. Obviously, I started meeting new people through Tinder. That summer was a parade of weirdness, including such hits as the guy who sent hilariously overpost nudes from his workplace, and the guy who I thought ghosted me but was in fact hospitalized following a crazy incident I don't want to talk about here. The difference between those guys and the subject of this story is that, unfortunate nudes and mental health struggles aside, they were both very nice people. But this guy not so much. The city where I was staying is home to a pretty sizable Navy base, so a lot of the guys I came across were military. As a rule, I don't go for anyone whose profession involves combat, weapons, or violence in general, like military personnel, cops, boxers, etc. But I figured this was just for the summer. So when I headed off with this Navy MP, I agreed to an in-person date. Given that I was dating quite a bit, I made a habit of always meeting guys at the same pub or restaurant down in the town center. So we arranged to meet there, and when the night came, I went through my usual first date routine. Get there half an hour early, do a shot of gnarly bottom self tequila to calm my nerves, and Start in on beer number 1. About halfway through that beer, in comes my date. Resplendent in a rhinestone-studded Affliction t-shirt, the likes of which I hadn't seen on a real person in at least 5 years. Little did I know the bad wardrobe was the least of his issues. Pretty much right off the bat, I was a little uncomfortable. He started talking about doing drugs, which really isn't my thing, and a lot of racist jokes towards Latinos, which, like Affliction, I hadn't encountered in a hot minute. He was Latino, so it wasn't like he was being racist really, but I'm white and feel weird laughing at racial jokes, so that was fun. The more awkward I feel, the more I drink, so bottoms up. But then it went from mere bad first date etiquette to a little troubling. Basically, he committed the cardinal first date sin of bringing up his ex-girlfriend. Actually, multiple of them. And some common threads emerged pretty quickly. Namely, that he had treated them all like princesses, and they all had been unfaithful to him. He had been the perfect boyfriend supposedly, and they were all evil Jezebels. His utter belief in his own victimhood was uncomfortable to say the least, especially combined with the sneering disgust that dripped off each sentence. I'm pretty sure every woman knows that a guy bringing up his ex unprompted and reciting a litany of her sins against him is a big red flag. I had already decided by this point that we probably weren't going to be going out again. At some point, I made a joke in passing about the fact that the uncle I was staying with is a retired senior chief and could totally look him up. Aha, fun joke, or so I thought. Apparently, he took it very seriously because he then, oh so casually but very deliberately, disclosed that a woman in his unit had accused him of assaulting her. Look at him go, like a stage magician pulling a string of red flags, one after the other from his sleeve. He went on to say that it was of course total BS. She just wanted to get the heck out of Bahrain and thought it would get her reassigned. This was absolutely no big deal to him, and he painted it as a typical of females in the military. If I hadn't before, I would have gotten the sense at that point that, for all he ostensibly liked me, or at least wanted a shot at sleeping with me, he had a decidedly shifty view of women in general. Around this point, I stopped ordering beers and instead ordered myself some fries. It was time to sober up and bail. Unfortunately, sobering up took a minute, and in that time, he went on to tell me about another false accusation in his life, of the same thing. This time, it was his little half-sister accusing their father of molesting her. This again was no big deal to him, saying she was lying, of course, under the direction of her bitch mother, who thought it would get her sole custody. Yet another alley into how much does this guy hate women column, and pure vitriol in his voice when he talked about this was disturbing. Now, regardless of whether any of these accusations were true or just as unfounded as he portrayed them, he had chosen to bring up the following: his cheating whore exes, his lying bitch fellow sailor, his lying little sister, and her scheming mother, all over the course of like 2 hours with a woman he barely knew. He spoke in a non-derogatory way exactly about one woman. His abuela. Every other woman he had ever met was, in his eyes, a liar, horrible person, a manipulator, or some combination of thereof. Thankfully, I sobered up pretty quickly after that and declined his offer to walk me to my car. Once I was home, I shook it off pretty easily. I'm used to this kind of thing, unfortunately. But the more I thought about it the next day, and many times since, the more I realized it was one of those situations that could have gone really, really bad. Had I let him walk me to my car, I think I would have been in a dark, half-empty parking garage with the guy who at best low-key hates women, and at worst actually assaulted a woman and casually mentioned it to me over drinks. The red flags from that conversation alone were so huge and obvious that, had something happened, my credibility would have been shot. People would have come out in droves to say I was at fault for putting myself in that situation with somebody who was so clearly disturbed. I honestly count my lucky stars nothing came of it, because it was another sad case of victim blaming waiting to happen. I recently went on a date with the guy from my school who I met on a dating app. He seemed super sweet and charming over text, so I agreed to go on a date with him, especially after 2 friends told me they knew him from a class where he was a generally funny guy. He went to a small, pretty prestigious university, which also made me sure that he'd be normal. He was supposed to meet me at 6 to go on a picnic, but ended up picking me up at 8:30. He texted me to reschedule to 8 and ended up showing at that time. He drove me to his apartment, and although uncomfortable, I agreed to go in because of everything I already knew about him. The apartment was only lit with 1 candle and a small glowing light on the floor, which didn't add much. It was a multiple bedroom apartment that he lived alone in, which made it even more odd. We talked and ate some food, and he seemed nervous and uneasy for most of it. He suddenly switched the conversation to our deepest, darkest secrets, and asked if I'd ever seriously thought about killing anyone. After I said no, he made up a story about being in the Navy and having to bomb a ship and killing at least 5 people. When I was unsure how to respond, he sort of just passed it off as a joke and said that he had seriously thought about killing someone else, his ex's current boyfriend. I was extremely uncomfortable at this point and wanted to leave, and he agreed to drive me home. Before we left, he said he wanted to show something to me and pulled out a rifle that he pointed in my direction. When I got startled, he remained eerily calm and said he got it for hunting, but couldn't think of even killing an animal. We left, and I got back to my friend's place safely. Everyone I've told this story to has been flabbergasted about how the date went, and I can't shake the feeling that something was off about him and it's creeping me out. And to clarify, I mean something more sinister about him. Any thoughts on this would be appreciated. When I was 24, I decided to experience life abroad, so I joined a program to become an au pair, fancy words for nanny in the USA. This is my messed up story. It isn't creepy, just all messed up. A family interviewed me and decided to pick me as their in-home nanny for their 2-year-old girl and their 4-year-old boy. The family lived in a pretty well-off area in San Francisco, and the couple was still married and in their mid-40s. So 3 months after I was interviewed, I finally arrived, but they couldn't pick me up, so they sent a driver to get me at the airport. I struck up a conversation with the guy since it was sort of a long drive and I was new to the city, and I wanted to know what there was to do and such. Then we reached my future home to be for the entire year. This lady told me that there was one rule in her home, which she had never mentioned to me the months before, and her rule was that I was never to say no to the kids. I finally met the kids, who were quite lovely, and the boy immediately liked me. I am a sporty person, so I decided to take BJJ and Muay Thai as activity, since I used to train back in my hometown. This will be relevant later on. About a week into my moving, she gave me this talk about this book she was reading that said that kids want to control everything, and the only things kids could control were eating, pooping, and changing their diapers. So if the kids didn't want to eat or take a crap or change their diapers, I couldn't push them to. That their bodies were wise enough to tell them when the diaper was bothering them, when they were hungry, etc. I had never seen a kid crying like crazy when you asked them to change their diapers, but that's what the 2-year-old would do. And of course, I was forbidden to say no to them, and I also had to let them be in control, so they never ate when I was supposed to feed them, but when they felt like it. She also told me that they didn't believe in spanking, timeouts, or any kind of punishment, so what I was to do when the kids were beating the ever-living crap out of each other was say, stop, grab the aggressor, and try to get them to be empathetic with the victim. So one day, the 2-year-old really wanted my phone, and I hid it inside my pocket, and bam, she slapped me across the face. Her mom saw her and tried to have a talk with her, telling her that hurt me, that I could cry. Has anyone ever tried to actually reason with a 2-year-old? She wasn't being successful, so she eventually just took the kid away. Then there was this huge incident where I took the kids to take a bath, and apparently the water didn't go, which isn't true, so she forbade me to ever take the kids for another bath since she was afraid that I would leave the water there and the 2-year-old, who loved baths, would try to go in and fall and drown. I explained to her that I would have never expected the water not to go since I was quite sure I lifted that thing that blocks the plumbing, and that we never went upstairs, and when we did, I made sure to close the bathroom and even the toilet's lid. But she wouldn't believe me and somehow implied I left the water there on purpose to drown the kids. Then she told me she didn't feel comfortable with the kids going in my room because there was a window nearby and she feared the kids would jump from the bed to the window and fall 2 floors to their death, which was quite hard since they would have needed to climb to the bed and then to a chair and then the window. It just made no sense. She was crazy about organic stuff. Every single item she had inside her fridge and kitchen was organic, including the kids' candies. I was allowed to have my own candy and sweets as long as I kept them hidden from the kids. However, when I showed up with a Coke, she wasn't too happy. One time we took a trip to some organic ice cream place and I got a chocolate ice cream. And as I was pouring it in my cup, she came right next to me and said, "That has aspartame, don't you know? That's really bad for your brain. If I were you, I wouldn't eat it. Please don't ever give that to my kids." After that, there were all these weird things she used to tell me. Like one day, I left some chicken that I no longer wanted to eat, so I just set it aside to have later on. The next day, she had a talk with me, telling me that food on plates absolutely grossed her out, that she didn't even clean her husband's plate, so why would she do it for someone else? To which I replied, I had set it aside to eat later. And her face fell to the ground. She said, "You ate that? That was sitting out for a long time and it has bacteria. You'll get sick." I mean, it's San Francisco cold, and the food wasn't out for days, but just for a couple of hours. She kept telling me things to scare me into staying home. Things like there are raccoons outside, so here's a flashlight so you can scare them away, but there are also coyotes, so you might want to not stay out too late. Which sounded quite weird, given that we were in the city. That place in town is super dangerous, or there are plenty of thieves over there. In another nice part of the city where another nanny lived. Anyways, one day she calls me and asks me to have a cup of coffee with her, which surprised me since we both live in the same house and it wasn't like we were friends to just go for a coffee. So I came and she tells me that she feels we're not a good match, that she thinks I should move to another family, that she has loads of negative feedback about me, and overall, it had been quite such a horrible experience. And I was quite shocked and asked her what kind of feedback, but she couldn't tell me, or just wouldn't tell me because it was so much. She had already called the au pair agency representative, who turned out to be this extremely dumb lady who explained to me that I had 2 weeks to find a new family or else I had to go back home to my country. I had only been in San Francisco for 2.5 weeks. In the meantime, my host mom was saying that she and her husband had booked a room in a hotel for me 3 days and that maybe I should go stay somewhere else. The agent is listening to all of this and she feels quite happy with herself after negotiating that I should stay for 1 week with the family that wants me out ASAP, so I can make a bit more cash, and then I should ask friends to stay with them or something. Because although she was supposed to make sure the nannies were fine, she couldn't have me at her place since she didn't even have a mattress or a couch for me to stay on. My host mom then tells me that during the time I stay with them, she would control my cell phone to make sure I didn't abuse it and that she would be very, very scared to have me around the kids. I was like, what? I'm a decent person. I'm not a criminal or anything. Why would the kids pay for the fact that you don't like me? However, I told her that if she wanted me out, I was fine with that and that I cared to say goodbye to the kids, but that was about it. I could be gone the next day, and she was like, "Honey, don't get me wrong, but they won't even remember you." And she got pretty offended that I wasn't exactly upset about leaving her family. The next day I came out of my room and didn't want to be near the kids that much since she had this fear that I would kill them or something. She told me that I could just go ahead and lock myself in my room the whole day if I want to. So I did just that, but a friend of mine texted me she was going downtown and asked me if I wanted to come with so I could get a new phone so that the new host families could reach me, since I was required to give up my phone at the end of that week. So I left the home and I started running late and I sent her a message telling her that I was going to be a bit later than I thought, but that I just didn't feel comfortable around her and that I felt like I was a threat to the kids and overall, that I felt bad about the situation. So what she did was immediately call the agency and tell them that I threatened her and her family. The agency called me right away and told me that I was not supposed to go back to her home anymore or she would call the police on me. Also, I couldn't get to my stuff without somebody from the agency present, and it might be the case that the agent would actually have to do my suitcase for me since I might not be allowed inside the home anymore. She texted me and said I was not to come to her place at all, and she immediately canceled the phone and the cards. I was shocked. I told them that regardless of how good my English might be, it's still my second language and it is expected that I make a few mistakes. That she was already treating me like I was a criminal and a monster, and I obviously didn't like that. But they weren't listening to me and said, "Look, just stay somewhere until 8 p.m. When we can go get you, we're too busy right now." So I was left completely confused. I hadn't had any breakfast that day, no money on me, and it was only 1 p.m. I sat at a bus stop and started crying. Luckily for me, my friend was on a bus and saw me, and I went home with her. By 8 p.m., I was picked up by the same dumb agent who took me to a friend's place. She now insisted I stay with her, but I felt so disgusted by her not listening to me. Furthermore, when the previous day she had insisted that I stay with a family that didn't like me, I refused her help. The next day, the agency sent me an email telling me that because I had seriously threatened my host family and refused the agent's help, I was being kicked out of the program, that they were canceling my visa right that moment, and that I had to leave the country immediately. And that's how I ended up left in the streets of the US, only with $100 on me, no visa, which is really bad here in the US, and no ticket to go home. One of my newly made friends heard my story and told her mom, who immediately took me to some lawyers. They kept asking me what I had done to make them so angry and so upset and hate me so much. And I kept saying I hadn't done anything, which is still true. They tried to negotiate that they let me back in the program, but they said they couldn't. They reviewed the contract and whatnot, but there was no way around it. I finally called them and told them that I would go to my own country's embassy and complain that I had been smuggled into the US, that they were making me an illegal, putting me in danger. So the least they could do was get me a flight, especially since I had just worked there for 3 weeks and there was no way I could have known they were going to kick me out like that, and I obviously had no savings. I had spent most of them paying to enroll in this program. They at least agreed on buying me a flight back home. This all happened in the span of 3 days. From the moment my host mom asked me to leave to the moment when I actually left the country, I only stayed in the program for 3 weeks before I was expelled. A few days after I left, one of the girls I used to hang out with told me that the family had just received a new 18-year-old nanny. They were trying hard to convince her of how dangerous the city was and make her feel like she owed them something by buying her a laptop and allowing her to bring friends and stuff like that. So my friend asked my former host mom why she had kicked me out like that, and the answer was simply because she was going out too much and I was afraid of the sports that she used to practice. So basically, she wanted me out for going out during my own free time rather than staying locked in my room, and because of martial arts. Months later, I spoke to the guy that picked me up when I arrived, and he told me that the family found out he had been talking with me that night, so they called his boss and had punished him for talking to me. I always wonder if that lady will keep saying just how everything is out there to kill you, and if her kids will grow up and get sick of that and not listen to her. Will she then try to reason with a teenager? Which is just as hard as reasoning with a 2-year-old. I feel bad for those kids because life doesn't say yes all the time. She was 44 years old, very successful, and worked from home. Her husband was making loads of money. If she wanted her kids to grow up with such a peculiar education, where they were never told no, she should have raised them herself and not brought people from other cultures to try to do so. All that these kids really wanted was their mom. Thanks for reading. For reference, this story took place around 6 years ago. At the time, I was an 18-year-old girl with a lot of home problems. I had been dating my boyfriend for almost 2 years around this point. He was Austrian and I was American. Due to our long-distance relationship, we decided that once I turned 18, we would start our gap year of traveling and working weird jobs in between. Since I was in a super toxic environment, I decided to go to Europe for an indefinite amount of time. I got a job as an au pair in Rome, and my boyfriend and I moved down to Italy to live there for 2 months. This story takes place in Rome, shortly after settling into my new family's home. I left their house to meet up with my boyfriend. Since I had just gotten there, I didn't even worry about my cell phone, so figuring I could rely on public Wi-Fi, I didn't purchase a SIM card right away. Bad decision. The location that we were meeting at was around a 25-minute walk away from where I was living, and since the public transport was not reliable, I decided I could walk the way with a downloaded map of Rome. I anyway wanted to see Rome in the night and how it lights up and becomes literally abandoned. Coming from New York, I was not used to a major city actually becoming quite quiet and resting for the night. I was starting to get a little sketched out after 10 minutes or so, walking through empty old streets. Following the map, I was led to a strangely shaped pyramid building, and walking behind it, I was slowly gaining the sense that I was no longer walking alone. I started to speed walk to at least be on the sidewalk of a street, and not behind a dark building with no lights. When I reached the sidewalk, I had that terrible feeling that comes over you when you know you're in actual danger. I turned around to find a 50-something-year-old man walking around 20 feet behind me. I quickly started to pick up walking to a fast pace, and when I turned around again, he had already cut the distance in half and was sprinting to me. The look on his face was pure rage and anger. At this point, I start booking it and running as fast as I can. Hearing the footsteps behind me sprinting is still a haunting feeling to this day. I ran ahead to a busy street and ran across to the other side. Out of breath and crying, I stood watching the man across the street try to cross, but fortunately for me, the light turned green and the cars were flowing and he couldn't cross. He began to scream and just have an utter meltdown. He was outraged. I fled at this point, running as fast as I could to a bridge nearby where, thankfully, my boyfriend was at. Since I took so long to get to the meeting point, he began to ride his bike to come and meet me. I hopped on the bike seat while he stood up and pedaled, and we got out of there quick. I don't know what his intentions were, and I'm glad I never found out. So to every person out there, avoid all the faults and mistakes I did. Never leave without a charged working phone. Try to avoid dark areas and unpopulated areas, and the moment you feel like something isn't right, it probably isn't. This event took place not too long ago. It happened on a Wednesday night when my best friend and I decided to go clubbing. Neither of us are actually club people, but it was free for ladies and a local rock band was performing. They're pretty famous around here, so we figured why not. It's been a while since we've gone out at night anyway. Nothing particularly interesting happened at the club as it was heavily overpopulated. When the show was over, we decided to leave, as it started getting even more populated with new people coming in. It was hard to keep up a conversation because we literally had to scream over each other and, in the worst cases, even push to get past the crowd. We walked around the old town and chit-chatted a bit. The old town was fairly quiet, except for the ambulance trying to aid a drunk guy who hit his head on the pavement. After a while, we both decided to go home. I had to get a taxi because it's quite a long 1-hour trip at least, and there was no way I was going to walk this path alone, as it tends to get quite dangerous at night. She lived closer to the city center and in another direction, so she decided to walk home instead. After I'd ordered my taxi, we parted ways. I had to wait 10 minutes at least, so I decided to sit down on a bench near the bus stop. That's where it began. I was scanning the area, and when I glanced over to the bus stop on the other side of the road, I noticed a dark grayish SUV parked right next to it. Right as I looked towards it, he started waving for me to come closer. I was confused and looked around again to see if there were more people around. When I glanced again, he tried to pull the same gesture, but I didn't respond like before. That's when he slowly started to drive. A bad gut feeling instantly kicked in, and then he pulled up right next to me as I feared. He rolled his window down and yelled, "I'm Ricardo." I'm not even sure if that was his real name. The guy seemed to be way older than me, at least twice my age. He appeared to be in his late 30s or early 40s and seemed to be either Puerto Rican or Colombian. Now, I know sometimes people tend to pick others up if their destination is on their radar, but I had a strong gut feeling that he had other things on his mind. When I told him I was waiting for a taxi, he kept insisting that I should cancel it and get in his car. He also called me baby a few times, and the red flags kicked in even more, of course. He asked for my name, and I blurted out a random name that popped in my head at the time. He took out his hand and wanted to shake hands. I stood up slowly, but something told me not to do it. That's when I got a small peek into his car. I'm pretty sure there appeared to be some ropes or wires on the back seat. There was also a silver light slightly shining from the back, which I assumed to be duct tape. I immediately froze and told him that I'd rather not get too close with strangers, and he tried to reassure me that he was a good guy and wouldn't hurt me. He started getting frustrated, and for some reason he thought that if he would say things like, "But you are so beautiful," at least twice, I would cool down and get in his car. No. He seemed to get angry, but as it took place in the city center and there were quite a few cars and other people around, he just asked me if I was sure for the last time, as if he hoped I changed my mind to his offers that he had made. I blew him off for the last time, and that's when he finally left. He didn't even say bye or anything, he just drove off like the wind. That's when I realized that he must have been waiting in that spot where I'd first noticed him. I didn't see any cars passing by while I was sitting at the bus stop. It's also the exact spot where most people would go after a night out to order a taxi or perhaps go to McDonald's. Whatever floats their boat. The club is located just southeast of the bus stop. A lot of girls were wasted that night, so he most likely wanted to take advantage of that too. When the taxi finally arrived, I texted my best friend. I froze when she texted me that a creepy kind of large SUV had stopped and mumbled something to her. She ignored him and kept on walking. Apparently, he attempted to follow her and kept shouting something, but since she had her earphones on, she couldn't really make up what he was saying. When she ran in between the houses, he was gone. Luckily, she got home safely and so did I. The moral of the story is to always be aware of your surroundings and listen to your gut feeling. I like to think that it wasn't half as bad as some stories I've read here on Reddit, that we handled the situation well, but something tells me that it would have been different if we were in a more private and secluded area. So, Ricardo, let's not meet again. Edit. Forgot to include some details. He offered to take me home if I was cool with having drinks with him. When I declined and told him I was tired and would much rather sleep, he kept on insisting that we should at least go for a coffee then. Yeah, right. I've tried Googling him for a background check, but so far nothing. We are currently considering going to the police to spread the word because he could be a potential danger. When I was in middle school about 10 years ago, I had an encounter with a classmate. He had saved me and my brother from bullies a few times and had quite the reputation of sending people to the hospital because of fights. One day, he had caught me when I was walking home. I was for some reason walking ahead of my brother and friends, and He said he wanted to talk about rumors I was supposedly spreading. He said if I tried to run, he would screw me up. Asked me if I liked video games and told me to tell my brother and friends he was going to give me a game for the Nintendo 64. To add a little bit, I was carrying a French horn in a heavily loaded backpack. We got to the house, which supposedly belonged to his friend, and he told me to climb into the boat as he started climbing over a gate to look for his friend. Looking back, he was checking if anybody was home so we would be undisturbed. The boat I was told to wait in was sort of a small houseboat and it had a small deck, and I was told to wait in the cabin. He told me he wanted me to perform fellatio on him, otherwise he would stab me. I called his bluff and told him no. I refused. He kept asking me if I wanted to be stabbed and failed to provide a knife. Then changed it to beating me up, and I told him I was used to it. I got bullied on an almost daily basis. Eventually, his threats changed to making me walk home stark naked if I refused, and I simply said no, I will not take anything off. He then asked me if I had any money, and I lied to him. I would be stabbed. I had only about 7 cents and pulled it out and showed him. There were a few moments of silence and more threats. I started getting a migraine and started crying because I wanted to go home. What felt like an eternity in captivity only turned out to be less than 45 minutes, and I escaped unscathed, untouched, and just incredibly shaken. I ran down the street, carrying my backpack and French horn. There were police officers all over the place, and when I got to my friend's house, which was about halfway home, his older cousin, who was trying to get into the department as an officer, tried to talk to a few of them, but they were quote-unquote busy with another investigation and didn't want to help. Fast forward a year, after my incident, and another friend of mine, whom he had mugged a few days before, he had spent some time in juvenile hall and came back, and I believe he assaulted 4 kids ranging from 11 to 14. Jose Avina, the name that will forever be etched into my mind. He was given 4 life terms at the age of 14 for his crimes. It was shocking when I found out after a year. I felt like I had really dodged a bullet and have ever since tried to live my life to its fullest. So, when I was younger, around 13 or 14, I was invited to go on a camping trip with my best friend Pat, his dad, and his uncles. It was this kind of guys' weekend, coming of age thing. Something I like to do with my kids now. You know, fishing, cooking over fires, our first couple of beers, sleeping in tents, and stuff like that. We drove pretty far up north, but this many years later, being 30, I can't remember where exactly we went. I know it was about 2 hours north of where I live now. We had packed Pat's dad's truck off the side of the road in a bush and canoed a pretty far distance down a river to a lake and set up our camp at the edge of the water. Right across the water, we could see this really old abandoned looking cabin. On the outside it looked abandoned, the roof was sagging and all the bushes were growing up around it. At one point, Pat's dad and his uncles were fishing and drinking and allowed us to go adventuring a bit. Surprisingly, they actually allowed us to take one of the canoes across the water to check out the abandoned cabin. In hindsight, I don't think I would let my boys now go that far where I couldn't get to them in an emergency, but they were drunk, lol. So being 13-year-old boys, we did exactly that. We paddled across and checked it out. On the outside, this thing looked super decrepit. The front door was unlocked and we went inside. This was a mistake. On the inside, it was certainly not abandoned and was very lived in. It really freaked us out knowing somebody lived there but was obviously nowhere nearby. There were porn magazines spread across the table, a bong, a tray full of weed, beer bottles everywhere, and on one of the shelves in the living room were 2 hunting shotguns. I know it was dumb to play with them, but we did. Never pulled the trigger, obviously, just walked around the house with them like idiots, feeling cool. We checked out different rooms in the house, but one really creeped us out. Yes, I understand we technically committed a break and enter, or a trespass, but we honestly thought it was abandoned before we got inside. Once we were in, we figured it was somebody's hangout or something, but it was pretty deep out in the woods. Anyways, one of the rooms had one of those mannequins that you see in a clothing store, but none of them were wearing any clothes, and they all had wigs of different lengths and colors. Something felt really weird about that, and we decided we'd had enough and left after putting the guns back where we found them. After canoeing back to our campsite, we told Pat's dad everything. He was almost as stunned as we were. That evening we fished some more and Pat caught a fish that his dad cooked over the fire. While we were eating dinner, 2 guys came by in a motorboat and stopped at our site. They were friendly enough and we all joked around a bit, and we had assumed they were just other campers or people out fishing, people like us. But then they invited us to their cabin just across the water to hang out. Pat's dad politely declined, and then they still lingered around and things just started to feel weird. The 2 guys were drinking quite a lot and exchanging weird looks. At one point they even asked Pat and me if just the 2 of us would go hang out. Pat's dad gave them a stern no, and things were even more awkward then. They stayed a while until it got dark and then they left. That night, Pat's dad and uncle stayed up all night by the fire while we were to sleep in the tent. We didn't do much sleeping, mostly just talking about how creeped out we were by those two guys that lived in that cabin and their wigs, porn, and guns. Eventually, we did fall asleep though. In the morning, everything was packed up and Pat's dad cut the trip short. We put the tent we were in away and left immediately. Most of the trip was spent talking about how his dad was really freaked out about those guys. Pat and I have talked about it here and there over the years, but years ago we had a major falling out. I never did exactly ask where that cabin was. I wouldn't want to go back there anyways. To the wig-wearing hermits in the cabin, please let's not meet again. Firstly, thanks for listening. This has been driving me crazy. Tell me what to do. So this all started about a month and a half ago-ish. I'm an adult in school. On the first day of school, a guy sits down by me. No problem. Don't think much of it. I say hello and go on with my learning. Over time we talk more. Sometimes have lunch and do friend things. Well, over time he got real possessive and only wanted to hang out with me and me alone. It started out only slightly concerning, but as it got worse, so did the concern. One day we decided to get a beer after school, and on the drive there I just had this bad feeling, but went anyways because of stupidity. We get there, park, and we start walking. He can tell I'm not thrilled to be there and he gets upset or mad. This makes my spidey senses go off like crazy, so I make something up and just literally nope out. I make up an excuse and jog to my car and go. Well, he apparently jogged after me because he opens the passenger door and tries to talk me into getting out and going with him. I say no. He closes the door and walks away. I stupidly think that's the end of it. I leave the parking garage and start down the street. There he is following me. He follows me past a few lights, and when we go to a red one, he gets out of his car and bangs on my window and yells at me to answer the phone. I had been ignoring several of his calls since I started driving. He gets back in his car and keeps following me a while and trying to call. After a few minutes, he goes in a different direction. I later find out he only stopped following me because he ran out of gas. I book it home and call my boyfriend freaked out. For context, he knew I was in a relationship and never tried to hide that. I get a million more calls and texts and don't respond to them. The next day at school, he follows me everywhere. He tries to get me alone any chance he can and keeps trying to sit by me or talk to me. Eventually I get mad and tell him to leave me alone in front of people. He gets mad and goes. After this, some fellow classmates report him to HR and he gets his little slap on the wrist, and I'm told to just not talk to him, but still see him and be in the same room as him all day. Fine, I'll try. That goes on uncomfortably for about a week and a half, and he keeps messaging me asking to apologize. I figure I've got a few more months in class with him. Fine, apologize and leave me alone. We meet outside in front of people. At lunch, and he tells me he's sorry but doesn't understand why I won't talk to him or be his friend anymore. Really, he just doesn't get it. He thinks I overreacted and we should be friends again. No. About a day and a half after that, the HR clerk calls me in and tells me she noticed I regained contact with him again. Since I did, I would now be responsible for his inappropriate behavior, and if he made any other students uncomfortable, I would be kicked out alongside him. Excuse me, what? I didn't know what to say and just left. I let the anger build up for about 2 days before I wrote a long, angry email to her. It's been over a week and still haven't heard back. Hope she came to her senses and never speaks to me again. After all that, I've been avoiding him and his gaze every day. Have to make sure we're never the last two in the classroom. Still get texts from him. Can I borrow $5 or want to have lunch together? I miss you, etc. So now I avoid him every day and don't trust the school at all. I don't know what to do about it really aside from avoiding him. We have a class barbecue tonight and he's going, of course. I felt so uneasy since I've woken up this morning. My spidey sense is going off like crazy about tonight. Update. The day after the barbecue, which went okay, he just glared at me all night, so not ideal but could have been worse. Much worse news. The HR emailed me back and it was not at all what I expected. She was going for full on. We had no idea you were being harassed. Why didn't you let us know? Denial. None of it has gone as expected, and now I've pushed to lows I didn't know were possible. I don't care anymore. Just don't. Whatever happens, happens. I want to respond to your email in greater depth, but more urgently, I am confused by the allegations of harassment, and this needs to be addressed beforehand. This is the first time you've made an accusation of harassment, and I'm concerned. Our original investigation and subsequent discussions were triggered by concerns from another student regarding a disruptive situation impacting their learning and safety. So that was the perspective that drove our initial investigations, conversations with you and other students, and remedy. After we met for the second time, I understand that you had a follow-on discussion with blank regarding your unhappiness and the perceived unfairness of the remedy we imposed, and the possible consequences explained to you. At neither meeting did you make claims of harassment. If you wish to register a complaint of harassment, please report it to me or here, right away. The matter will be investigated. If it is determined that you are being harassed, immediate action will be taken place. Harassment of any kind is not permitted here. I got a kick out of that, because harassment not permitted, huh? Already was and was completely passed by. This took place when I worked at a local Walmart about 5 or 6 years ago. I was 21 at the time and had already been working at Walmart for more than a year, so I had my share of experiences with questionable and sometimes pretty scary customers, but there was one customer who burned into my memory that I will never forget and who probably changed my life forever. It was a weekday, so it was fairly slow. I was working alone in the girls' clothing department and focusing on tidying up my area, like folding clothes, organizing hangers by size, etc. It had only been about 30 minutes into my shift when a gentleman began passing by me and started to slow down. I saw in my peripheral vision that he was looking my direction, so I looked over expecting him to have a question. What I instead got was him saying, through a painfully wide grin, was, "Hey baby," followed by a kiss blown in my direction. I furrowed my brow and pursed my lips in confusion, unsure of whether he was just trying to be funny or was truly that alpha at wooing women. He made his kissy face for what was probably a full minute, and while I studied him awkwardly, I couldn't help but realize that his sense of style seemed to be very heavily influenced by that guy Pauly D from Jersey Shore. Same kind of hairstyle, clothing style, and stuff. It was actually kind of amusing. After blowing his puckered kisses, he moved along and I continued my work. For the next hour, I saw him pass by in the same direction many more times. At least 6 or 7 that I could count when I was actually paying attention. And the first 2 times he did the same thing, calling me baby and blowing his kisses. It started to get obnoxious after the 3rd time, so I moved further into my department and faced the opposite direction when I saw him passing. He responded by changing his path and was now walking directly through the neighboring clothing sections and was slowly getting closer and closer with each passing, as if he were circling in like a shark around my figurative boat. The longer he circled, the more my gut clenched. Eventually, he directly approached me. He reached out and lightly caressed my hair from behind me and held it in his fingers for a couple of seconds. I had very long hair, so he wasn't right up on my face with his hands or anything, but still ew. I turned around to see him holding my hair, and I took it back into my hands wide-eyed. "You have beautiful hair. You're so beautiful," he said. "Thank you." I didn't want to snap due to fear of getting myself in trouble, and plus since I was deeper into my department, there weren't exactly a lot of people around that could see me anymore, so I didn't want to set him off if I got an attitude. I started to slightly shake with mild anxiety and felt my face get hot as my blood pressure rose. My gut was screaming at me that something was seriously wrong with this dude. Again, he carried on walking without another word, and he winked and blew another kiss. It was then that I realized that the cart he had with him only had 2 items in it. So he had been circling my area for more than an hour, and most likely wasn't even really shopping, for general merchandise or food anyway. I decided that this was a good opportunity to take a break, and ran off to hide in the break room for the usual 15 minutes I was given. While I was in there, I saw my coworker and good friend, let's call him Chris, come in and told him briefly about what was going on. Mainly just that a guy had been circling around and calling me baby, but that was all I could squeeze in before I had to go back to my post. He expressed that he found it creepy and told me that he was due to clock out in a couple of hours, so he would check on me on his way out to see if the guy lets up. 2 hours seemed like more than enough time to get him to leave, right? I mean, maybe he was already gone since I was in my department for those 15 minutes anyway. Well, I didn't necessarily see him. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting him to come from behind me. I even kept my hair over my shoulder in front of me, so it wasn't flowing down my back anymore, and I became more and more paranoid as it started to sink in that this complete stranger just made physical contact with me in a way that I wasn't comfortable with, and I wasn't sure if he would do it again or do worse. The unknown was frightening. I kept working in this anxious state as I made my way over to the girls' jean shelves and began removing wadded piles of jeans to fold. That's when I saw him again. He was behind the shelves, watching me from there for who knows how long. I mean, an hour and a half is a long time for not physically seeing him, but realizing he never actually left the store, like I'd hoped, was enough to make me queasy. When I saw him, I let out a short gasp, dropped the jeans, and backed up with my hands to my chest. He gave a shit-eating grin with a sly chuckle. He walks around the shelf and asks, "Did I scare you?" "Yeah, in fact, you did." I heard the fear in my voice this time, and I'm certain he did too. He apologized, but he didn't leave, instead asking me questions he had no business asking. I gave every single one a vague or sarcastic answer. "Time to get off of work." "Not soon enough." "Where do you live?" "Not around here." "Do you like to hang out anywhere after work?" "Anywhere that's with my boyfriend." "How long have you been with your boyfriend?" "A long time." Eventually, he realized I wasn't giving him the desired information he wanted, so he moved along once more, but this time saying he would be back later. I took out my phone to check the time after this, and that's when everything dawned on me. How much worse this was than I initially thought. He had been there for almost 3.5 hours. Not only was this dedication scary enough, but what was worse was I was only working a half day, meaning my shift was over in less than an hour, and I was truly and utterly afraid that he was going to follow me to my car, or worse, home. As I looked at my phone in horror, almost as if I had physically called him, Chris came by after clocking out as he promised. My face was bright red, and I felt as though I was going to have a panic attack. I told Chris that the man was still here and he was getting worse. I also told him everything as fast and quietly as I could, in case the poly wannabe came back before I could finish. "Chris, I don't know what to do." He's still circling me like a shark and was watching me from behind the shelves. He was asking me a bunch of questions I didn't want to answer, and he's wondering what time I'm off work. He freaking touched me and caressed my hair. I don't know what to do. I have 30 minutes left on my shift, and I don't know what this guy is capable of or what he's planning. I don't even know the guy's name. I'm scared, and I just don't know what to do. Chris asked me which way the guy went so he could see him for a description, and I told him that if he waited a few minutes, he would come back on his own. So he did, and he tried to distract me with a normal conversation and calm me down. About 5 minutes in, here he comes. I told Chris to act normal and let him know that the guy was coming up on my right. We kept holding our conversation as Chris casually glanced over. I held a fake smile for a moment as though our conversation were going ever so well, and I looked over with my eyes. Polly Wannabe was glaring at Chris, daggers that could cut thin air locked in his direction, turning his head as he passed by. Chris played dumb as though he didn't notice and said out loud that he was going to grab his stuff and turned to head back toward the back room, despite the fact that he was on his way out the door. After Chris left, my creepy admirer came right back up to me as though he were waiting for that, bumping me lightly with his cart, asking if that was my boyfriend. I told him that he wasn't, although I probably should have lied, now that I think about it. He began asking if I could get him a job there. What? And started asking me more questions about what I usually do, what departments I work in. Again, I gave vague answers. Not that it would do much good because no matter where exactly I am at work, I am still somewhere in the building and could be found rather easily. As he's holding the Q&A, I see two managers, a man and a woman walking into my department as Chris passes by, giving me a reassuring nod that Polly Wannabe didn't see. The managers just stood there watching us. I looked over at them with the cry for help in my eyes, and they inched closer. The creeper took notice and turned to me, silent for a moment. "Am I getting you in trouble?" The last words I spoke to him were, "It's not me that's about to be in trouble." The jig was up. He left his cart. That still had the same 2 items in it, and Power walked out of the store. The managers came to me and asked if he was bothering me, and I told them everything. The shark circling, and watching from behind the shelves, the uncomfortable questions, the hair touching, all of it. And topped it off with the fact that it went on for what was now almost 4 hours. They told me they would check the cameras and see if they could get a good shot of his face so security could keep a record of the incident in case he returned. Also to see if he bothered anybody else. They then asked one of the other managers to walk me to my car after my shift and to wait until I pulled out of the lot before returning indoors to make sure I wasn't obviously being followed. I made it home safely and without issues, but the fear still lingered. I could never return to work without the paranoia again. I worked there for a little more than another year, and he never ended up coming back that I saw anyway, but I never forgot him. I kept constantly looking over my shoulder when I worked alone and feared that he would return. And any time that fear began to disperse, I had nightmares that would remind me of him. Those nightmares came and went up until about 2 years ago. Even though I know the situation wasn't as bad as it could have been, my overthinking and anxiety kept repeating what if and making me think about what he could have possibly had planned had he succeeded at sticking around until I left for the day. It affected my ability to go anywhere in public alone, even to this day. After the nightmares finally stopped, however, I was in for a surprise. I may not have been overthinking things as much as I thought, that my gut feelings were correct. His mugshot showed up on my newsfeed in July of 2017. The local sheriff's office was looking for him and found him shortly after. He was wanted for stalking, apparently going to businesses and picking out women to hang around. Watch and harass was a hobby of his, exposing himself to women, masturbating in front of a store, where he was watching women work through the window, grabbing a woman's breast, and grabbing a woman between the legs. He pleaded no contest to these charges. As I looked at his mugshot in disbelief, I took the opportunity, now having his name, to look into his criminal history. One of the most recent charges I just listed, he had been arrested for many counts of different types of battery on people on many different ages, one being older than 65. And at least one included him being armed. But the charge that hit me the hardest was that about a year before my encounter with him, he was charged with kidnapping. Whether or not something of that nature was what he had planned for me, I will never know. But I'm glad I didn't have to find out. I consider myself very fortunate that I didn't have it as bad as the other poor souls he was able to get his hands on, thanks to Chris and the managers that watched over me. Why this man was able to walk free for so long despite his consistent disgusting actions is a mystery. I don't know what his sentencing was last July, but if the justice system lets him roam once more, all I can say is I hope we never meet again. Some of you may or may not remember my crazy neighbor who has been terrorizing everybody. He is currently spending a lovely stay in the local jail, awaiting arraignment. One neighborhood family had a 4th of July party Saturday the 5th. It was a low-key barbecue, and at some point one of the kids there invited some other kids back to his place to play Wii. A bit later, the crazy neighbor shows up at the barbecue. He corners one of the moms and basically says he will kill her kid if he's ever on his property again. Somebody else overhears, and pretty soon the crazy neighbor is surrounded by understandably upset people who just heard a death threat against their kids. Apparently, the crazy neighbor starts talking back and saying he just meant for them to stay off his property and that he has a right to defend himself. When the crowd started getting angry, he ran off. Cops were called and corralled by their parents. According to the kids, they were walking by the crazy neighbor's house when a car came around the curve. There's no sidewalk, so they stood off to one side of the road. Then the neighbor came out yelling at them. The cop went to his house, and the next thing somebody sees is the crazy neighbor in the back of the cop car. Nothing happens around here Saturday night or Sunday, so the neighbor isn't going anywhere until Monday at the earliest. No clue yet what the charges were. The whole neighborhood is abuzz. Edit. Apparently, he will be serving another weekend in jail and had a fine, plus he has to take some sort of class now. Also, are there some other charges from non-neighborhood issues? Not sure if that was his interaction with the cops or what. Details are sketchy. The police blotter just said he was arrested after making threats and resisting arrest, so everything I am hearing is word of mouth. My story isn't that spectacularly scary, but it was extremely creepy and very real, so here it goes. About 2 months ago, I had gone to McDonald's at around 7:30 a.m. to buy a barbecue breakfast burger. Can't remember the burger's name, but it was before I started class. The McDonald's is in a mall, so the seating is just one large food court. Anyways, I'm usually very shy and introverted, so I wanted to find a quiet spot around the edge of the food court to eat my burger. I find a seat, and there are only 2 middle-aged ladies sitting to one side of me, and this one man around his 50s, maybe 60s, obese, sitting to the other side eating a tin of sardines. I sit down, put my bag on my lap, and start eating it. During the consumption of my very unhealthy yet delicious burger, the old man begins mumbling things to himself. It's very faint, and I don't take much notice of it, as he appeared to be a man who had a bit of going on upstairs, if you know what I mean. Quickly, his mumbling becomes slightly louder and clearer, and at this point I can fully understand what he's saying. He's talking about murdering people, saying he'll slit someone's throat and mentioning it wouldn't be hard to track somebody down and kill them and their entire family. He went on with these threats for a while. The list of these threats was more extensive, but it was a while ago and I can't remember much. I'm thinking at the time he's on the phone with somebody, so I'm more skittish than scared. I expertly take a glance at him by pretending to be alerted by someone's tray hitting the table and then turning my head toward the man. I look at him and there he is. No phone in sight, staring directly at me with the dirtiest, most malevolent look. Now I'm scared. Being very shy, I will try to avoid aggressive or violent confrontations with anyone really, so I finish my burger, but I stay seated drinking my water because I've still got to wait over an hour to go to school. And he continues with the mumbling threats. I am stupidly shy like I said, but I know when enough is enough. Is this old guy seriously talking about slitting my mother's throat? Or mine? I begin to work up the courage to say something to him. I'm thinking something along the lines of, "What did you just say to me?" I also have the non-emergency police number ready to use it as a threat. I delay it as long as possible, and finally he finishes his canned sardines. He gets up to throw the cans away, and when he goes back to his seat, he packs up his bag, readying to leave. I'm pretty freaking relieved. At this point, I'm thinking, well, I can't believe I got scared. This guy clearly has a few mental problems. To note, he's still mumbling the death threats, which I've come to the conclusion he's not directing them at me personally. They're just a general thing, as he's definitely messed up psychologically. But it's not over yet. As he's standing up and packing up his bag to go, he looks at me and I look at him, and he says, "I'll see you very soon, boy," and walks off. So, that's my personal let's not meet again story. Not absolutely horrifying, but it's the truth. Since that morning, I have not seen him again, nor has my family been brutally slain, yet, and hopefully never. Hello everyone, my name is Luke and I'm French. I'm 26 years old and I have currently lived in Australia, Brisbane since May 2019. I met my girlfriend Mina, who is of Japanese origin, 1 month after my arrival in Australia on a strawberry farm where we both work. We worked over there for several months until the health crisis hit the planet, so no more work on the farm, we have to do something else. At that time we had two choices, go back home and split up or stick together and try to get through this event on our own. Spoiler, we chose the second solution. We then decided to leave our seasonal job in the countryside to go into town trying to find a new job. Bingo. Good news for me. An employer has agreed to hire me to work on a local Australian football team. This employer will be named Kathy. Kathy explains to me that I can work for the football team, but that currently, because of the health crisis, a containment will be mandatory even if at this time Australia is rather spared compared to Europe. Anyway, I am hired, but I'm going to have to wait until the lockdown passes and the football season resumes. So, I explained that it tempts me, but that it will be tense for Mina and me to remain unemployed during the confinement because we have to pay rent and food, etc. You should know that Kathy has a heart as big as Australia. Sensitive to our situation, she explains that she has a solution for us. She has a holiday home several kilometers from Brisbane that belonged to her father, who is now in a retirement home where we could stay for free for while confinement is in progress. At this time, I don't believe it too much. I tell myself there is something fishy in front of the situation. I agree. This is the best solution for us. We accepted this and moved to the house a few days later. Animal Crossing, Splatoon, and MK. We enjoyed playing video games during this lockdown. Everything is going fine. We feel a little bit lonely because this house is isolated in the countryside, but apart from that we are well. We have a garden. All this for free. I also point out that this house is like in the middle of nowhere. I just have a neighbor, John, who takes care of horses I've been friends with, and that's it. Other details that will have their importance. In this house, there is a main entrance door with a large fuzzy glass so you can distinguish things through it. And there is another wooden door behind the house that overlooks a veranda connected to the house. This house is a single story, so there are no floors, and to finish, no curtains at the window except in the bedroom. The context is given. The story begins now. 3 or 4 weeks after I moved in, Kathy calls me with good news. I can go to work. First day of work, everything goes smoothly. I like what I do and it's a very good atmosphere. The only problem is, we're still in Kathy's father's house, which is several miles from Brisbane, and I don't have a car, so I have an hour and a few trains to go and the same one to come back. But like I said before, I have nothing to complain about. For the record, Mina was still looking for work. She wasn't as lucky as I was, so she was mostly at home while I was working. Second day of work, always at the top. 5 p.m., I'm about to finish my job when I get a call from Mina. She whispers, the voice trembling, and you have to know that we communicate in English, both. And we are not necessarily bilingual, so sometimes we understand each other half. The first second I feel something's wrong. Here, I will switch from her point of view to give you a maximum of detail. She was quietly playing Animal Crossing on the couch when suddenly she saw a silhouette through the blurred window of the main entrance door. Too small and too wide for me or John, and she understands it very quickly. She stares at this figure that is now motionless facing the front door. It is at this moment when she tries to get up gently, walk away from the door, that this guy begins to frantically knock. Her heart is racing and she doesn't know what to do. She tries to be as discreet as possible so this guy thinks no one is there or will open it to him. She finally decides to hide in the wardrobe of the room because it's the only room where we cannot see what is happening from the outside. Snuggling between the hangers and our clothes and praying for him to let go, she suddenly remembers that there is a second door behind the house that is open and she doesn't know if it's locked or not. Being courageous, she decides to rush through the house to reach this door, and then during her run, she sees this guy sneaking past one of the windows of the kitchen. He goes around to check if there is a door at the back of the house. Panicked, but already in her race, she decides to go to the end and try everything. She must close this door before he tries to open it. It is finally when she presses the latch that she hears the individual trying to push the door. Completely frightened, she goes back to hiding in this wardrobe, and that's when she calls me. As I said earlier, I struggled a little bit to understand what she was saying to me on the phone. Her voice trembled, etc., but I immediately tried to calm her down so that I could have clear information about what was going on. After a minute or so, I asked her to focus on her breathing and listen to me, and she calmly describes to me what just happened. I switch my modes. I have to go home as soon as possible while making sure that she is in the least amount of danger. I ask to stay in the closet and call the police and call me back right away until I get home. She decided to stay on the phone with me, which is not the best solution, I admit. She should have called the police, but I was in a state of total stress, and the fact of her having on the phone continuously reassured me. I ordered an Uber, who must have found me super weird. Besides, I kept asking him to go faster, even to pay more. After a few minutes, I am in my Uber, always with Mina on the phone. She explains to me that she can't hear anything anymore, like no one knocking on the door or no one around the house. I don't advise to her anymore, but finally she motivates herself to take a look out the wardrobe. To finally, a few minutes later, confirm to me that the silhouette is no longer visible behind the door, that nobody seems to be around the house. I'm in front of my house. I go to meet Mina and give her a big hug by explaining that I'm here. She has nothing to fear. 6 p.m. It's night at this time of year in Australia. I check the locks and try to pass the ideas of playing a game and watching anime. Big mistake. In my relief, to rush to find it without problem, I have omitted a detail of the greatest importance. Check around the house. Damn, Luke. Why not check around the house? It's time for bed. 1 a.m. The neighbor's horses wake me up. I hear the hoofs. Mina, still not really asleep, asks me what the noise is, and I answer that it's the neighbor's horses. 3 a.m. Loud booming sounds. Somebody knocks frantically at the door, but like super strong, like he's halfway to breaking down the door. I can tell you that I discovered what adrenaline was at that time. I'm sure it's the same guy, and he's been trying to get into the house all along. Mina screams. I start to tremble everywhere. I have this feeling of being paralyzed, but still having so much energy to spend. It's very strange. I get up from bed in order to barricade the back door and then call the police. It is at the moment when I leave the room that I hear a deaf and metallic noise. Damn, he opened the back door. He's on the porch. So there is only one last door with a poor wooden hold under the small space at the bottom of the door that separates us, and he's still determined to come inside. For me at this moment, it is sure he will enter. I'm not much of a fighter, but not the choice. I get the biggest knife I have. I place myself at an angle so that I have the best chance of catching him by surprise when he enters, and I'm willing to use that knife to defend us, to defend Mina, who is paralyzed in bed. I'm scared, but at the same time I have confidence. It's really, really strange. When suddenly, in the midst of her millions of thoughts, Mina screams, "Stop! Call the police!" I look at her and she throws my phone at me, and I think that instead of waiting without doing anything, maximizing my chances of staying safe while waiting for her behind the door, it's a good idea. So always in the same position, ready to defend myself, I call the police. The phone call must have lasted 40 seconds. The policeman on the phone understood directly that it was serious. He asked me the address, and that they were on their way. At this moment, I found myself a little bit more relieved while staying on the lookout. This is where the individual starts mumbling. incomprehensible stuff, which does not reassure me because of the noise that it makes. I tell myself that it is either a drunk or drugged guy or a mental patient. He must have figured out I called the police, but he's still touching the handle and pushing the door. I've never been happier to see flashing lights. The cops are here. 4 police officers and 1 police dog. When I see them approaching the house, I hear noises behind the door. The individual seems to get scared and gives up. I hear the dog barking, the policeman screaming, and a man moaning. It was over. The individual neutralizes and gets into the car. One of the police officers remained to talk to us and take our side of the story and find out whether we wanted to file a complaint or not. He told us that there was a chance that this man was a rehab patient who'd run away. He also told us that he wasn't sure of anything at the time and that they would have to verify his identity, but we never heard from the police. There you go. Australia is a great place. I'm kidding. Despite that, we have wonderful moments here, and nothing similar happened then. It's already way too long, so I'm done here. Hoping that this moment of intense life captivated you. Peace. Okay, so before I delve into my own creepy story, I want to acknowledge that there were many times throughout the following encounters that I acted very stupidly and unsafely. So before anyone comments on how dumb I was, I know that as I type this, I had the South Park Joseph Smith Dumb 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 song going through my head. When I was 19 years old, like most people my age, I was attending university and was living in a private house off campus with a few other students. As I'm not the most sociable person and didn't go out very often, my daily routine was pretty consistent. Wake up early, morning lectures, lunch at home, evening lectures, and then home for the night. The campus was around a 15-minute walk from the house, which I made alone as my flatmates were based on different campuses. One day I was walking to university with my earphones in when I noticed a red car crawling along beside me. The driver was male, around 5'9", quite muscular with a few noticeable tattoos. He was staring right at me, and so I pulled out my headphones to hear what he was saying. He asked me some general questions like name and what I study, and then for my telephone number because he'd like us to go on a date. I wasn't interested at all, but I'm one of those people that have a hard time saying no, so I gave it to him but changed the last digit thinking I wouldn't see him again. Even though he claimed to go to the same university, it's pretty big. And he probably asks a lot of women out, so he wouldn't be too fussed. I then hurried off and forgot all about it by the end of the day. A couple of weeks later, I was walking to university again when I spotted the red car turning the corner on the opposite side of the road. Feeling a little bit embarrassed, I avoided eye contact and walked a little bit faster, only to hear the sound of tires screeching on the road behind me as it made a sudden U-turn. Now on my side of the road, the red car zooms past me and comes grinding to a halt a few meters ahead. The guy gets out and rushes towards me. I'm shocked, but continue walking until he blocks my path and begins shouting in my face. Why haven't you been answering your phone? I told you I want to take you out. I've been calling you every day for weeks and you haven't been answering. He wasn't much taller than me, but it felt like he was towering over me, really close and very angry. I decided that telling him I wasn't interested wouldn't be the best thing to do as he was so upset, so I said I had been busy, that I had finals, and had switched off my phone to focus on my work. He calmed down instantly and his whole demeanor changed. It was almost a Jekyll and Hyde transition. He then said, "It makes sense that you're busy. I've seen you walking to campus every day. You are in the library every evening now, and you shouldn't work so hard." The only new addition to my routine was nights spent in the library. It didn't seem weird at the time because he had told me he goes to my university, so I shrugged it off. He then claimed to be going to class too and asked if he could drop me off. For somebody who reads extensively about serial killers, in particular Bundy, you would think I would have known better than to get into a car with a stranger. But he wasn't even offering candy, so I'm officially dumber than a 5-year-old. I rationalized that the campus was 15 minutes away through fairly busy streets, which I knew well, and that he had calmed down now, so I got in the car. Almost immediately, I felt it was a huge mistake. For the first few moments, we were silent until I couldn't stand the awkwardness any longer. I asked him what he studied and what year he was in, to which he gave very vague short answers, so I figured he didn't want to talk and fell silent again. Then it started. "I'm sorry I got so angry. I just really like you. When I spoke to you, it made me like you more, and I noticed you have really clean fingernails. Not like some of those whores with painted nails you see. I hate girls like that," he said. "Oh, and do you speak another language? I like it when girls speak to me in another language when we're having sex," he said. I laughed most of this off as I didn't know what to say and noticed we were approaching a street next to my campus gate. At this point, I was thoroughly freaked out and just wanted to get to the closest, safest place I could find. He thankfully pulled over and let me out, insisting on walking me to the door because his next lecture was about to start and was a few doors away. I slipped into the nearest room I could find, pretending it was my next class, after saying my goodbyes. Inside the room, I waited a few minutes hoping he'd be gone, and he was. However, when I started walking to my actual class, I noticed he was leaving the campus. After this encounter, I decided to change my walking route, which successfully meant I didn't see him again. One evening, I noticed I had a mass email from my course organizer warning all students, especially female, to be vigilant, as an assault had been reported the night before in an area close by. A description was eventually released of the perpetrator, which sounded very eerily similar to the man in the red car, mostly due to the similarity between the tattoos described in the report and the ones I have seen up close. I don't know if he was caught, but I never saw the guy ever again. About 4 years ago, I lived in a college town while my husband attended the university there. I had 2 small daughters, a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old, and we loved the city. It was super family friendly and had a ton of great places for me to spend time with my kids. One of these great places was a public library. The children's section was secluded from the rest of the building, so the kids were free to run and play without disturbing anyone. There were toys and puppet shows, a huge train set, and an awesome princess castle. My kids loved it, so we hung out there at least twice a week. One morning, I loaded my kiddos up and headed to the library. My 2-year-old was playing with the castle, her favorite, while I held the 6-month-old a few feet away. A woman approached me, gushing about how cute my baby was. I was pretty used to this. My daughter was a stunning baby after all. Big brown eyes, dark ringlets, and the chubbiest cheeks ever. People always came up to me cooing at her. But this woman was different. My mommy senses started going off, and I got a pit in my stomach, and I was immediately put on edge. She stood way too close to me and was touching my baby girl way too much. She was even pinching her cheeks and rubbing her head, grabbing her little hands and kissing her, inching closer and closer, all the while. She kept saying, "Oh, I just love babies. She's so pretty and I love her," in this sort of manic sing-song voice. I kept trying to put a little distance between us, but she wouldn't have it, always inching closer. Then she started asking to hold her, and I immediately made excuses. "Well, she's pretty tired, and we need to go soon. She's really attached to me and she'll just cry." Looking back, I wish I had just told her to leave us alone, but I was nervous and didn't know what she was trying to do, so I defaulted to politeness. After a moment or two, my baby dropped her binky onto the floor, and the woman stopped down to grab it for me. But instead of just handing it to me, she put it in her own mouth, supposedly to clean it off, then tried to pop it back into my daughter's mouth. I snatched it and told her I needed to go. She said, "Oh please, let me hold the baby before you go." I obviously told her no and started trying to get my older daughter's attention so we could leave. The woman then said, "Oh, I just love babies, I can't help it," and grabbed my daughter from my arms. She then started inching away from me. By this point, I was petrified and furious. I firmly said, "Give me my child back," lunged for her and grabbed my baby bag. I had to practically push her away from me. She started scooting closer again as soon as the baby was out of her arms. I grabbed my older girl and hightailed it out of the building, hoping to escape as fast as I could. As I approached my car, I realized that the woman had followed us to the parking lot. She was still gushing. "Oh, you have 2 beautiful babies." I felt sick to my stomach. I realized that while I was buckling the baby into a car seat, my 2-year-old would be standing next to me, where this crazy woman could potentially try and grab her. Sure enough, she was inching closer and closer to us every second. I was certain at that point that she was going to try and steal one of my kids. I was shaking and close to tears, but my adrenaline kicked in and I was somehow able to pick up both kids and buckle them safely in the car without letting go of them. As I was pulling away, I watched the woman in my rearview mirror. She just stood there in the parking lot watching my car until we were out of sight. I didn't go back to the library for a long time after that.